I looked into the darkness outside the Challenger's window. Our lights barely cut through the black water. 8,000 meters underwater, the pressure out there would crush someone instantly. I squeezed the metal railing hard, my knuckles going white. "You okay there, Mitchell?" I turned to see Captain Evans standing behind me, his face lit up by the blue light from the monitors. "Yes, sir. Just taking it all in." He nodded, not entirely convinced. 3 weeks down here and you still look like you're seeing a ghost every time you look out there. I forced a smile. Just a healthy respect for the deep, Captain. Well, your healthy respect has produced some excellent samples. Dr. Phillips was just telling me about the extremophiles you collected yesterday. Thank you, sir. As Evans walked away, I turned back to the viewport. It's pretty funny. I'm a marine scientist who's scared of the deep sea. But here I was, on a research trip to the bottom of the ocean. I'd studied these depths for years from labs and research centers, but actually being here felt completely different. I checked my watch. Time to collect the next round of hydrothermal vent samples. I grabbed my equipment and headed to the collection bay. The next few hours passed quickly. I extracted minerals and biological samples from the collection units we'd placed near some active vents. Focusing on the work helped me not think about all the water surrounding our vessel. After logging the last sample, I put everything away and headed to the mess hall. The small room wasn't empty when I got there. Sarah Bennett sat at one of the tables talking with lots of hand gestures. Michael Harris sat across from her, looking down at a tablet and occasionally nodding without looking up. "Tom," Sarah waved me over. "Come look at these readings." I grabbed a cup of coffee and joined them. "What am I looking at?" "Pressure anomalies." Sarah pushed her tablet toward me. "I've been tracking them for the past week. See these fluctuations? They don't match any known tidal patterns or underwater currents." I studied the graph. "Could be equipment malfunction." "That's what I said," Michael murmured without looking up from his own data. Sarah shook her head. "I've checked the equipment 3 times. These readings are accurate." "What do you think is causing them?" I asked. "That's the exciting part. I don't know." Her hazel eyes lit up behind her rectangular glasses. "It could be a new type of deep-sea current, or maybe seismic activity we haven't detected yet." I was about to respond when the mess hall door flew open. Ryan Wilson burst in, his blonde hair disheveled and his eyes wide. "We've got a situation," he said, breathing hard. "Japanese research vessel about 20 nautical miles from here. Their submersible is trapped at the bottom of the trench." The room fell silent. "How bad?" I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. "Bad. 4 scientists on board. They're stuck in some kind of crevice and can't maneuver out." Sarah stood up. "Have they sent coordinates?" Ryan nodded. "Captain wants everyone in the command center now." We followed Ryan through the narrow corridors of the Challenger. The command center was already buzzing with activity when we arrived. Captain Evans stood at the central console, his face grim as he spoke into a communication device. "This is Captain Evans of the Challenger. We're receiving your distress call." "Over." A crackling voice responded, heavy with a Japanese accent. "This is Captain Yamamoto of the Kotoku. Thank you for responding. Our situation is critical. We understand you have a submersible trapped. Can you give us more details?" "The Koan was conducting an exploratory dive when it became wedged in a narrow crevice at approximately 10,900 meters. They have been trapped for 6 hours now. Oxygen levels are becoming critical." I felt my chest tighten when they mentioned the depth. The Challenger Deep is the deepest spot in all the Earth's oceans. Captain Evans looked around the room. "What assets do we have that can reach that depth?" Our chief engineer stepped forward. "The Shackleton can handle it. She's rated for 11,000 meters. How quickly can we deploy?" "She's ready to go. We'd need about 3 hours to prep for a rescue mission." Evans nodded. "Start preparations immediately." He turned back to the communication system. "Captain Yamamoto, we're preparing our submersible for a rescue mission. What's the estimated remaining oxygen supply for your crew?" At current consumption rates, approximately 18 hours. But if they remain calm and conserve oxygen, perhaps 24. Understood. We'll keep this channel open. Please stand by for updates. As the command center erupted into activity, I found myself backing toward the door. The thought of going to the very bottom of the trench made me break out in sweat. Evans caught my eye. "Mitchell, Bennett, Harris, stay behind. I need to speak with you." When the room had cleared except for the essential personnel, Evans addressed us. "I need 2 volunteers to pilot the Shackleton. The mission is to attach a rescue cable to the Koan and guide it out of the crevice." Sarah immediately stepped forward. "I'll go, Captain." Evans nodded. "Your experience with pressure systems will be valuable." He looked between Michael and me. "I need one more." Michael stared at his tablet. "I'm not qualified for submersible operation." All eyes turned to me. I knew I was the logical choice. I had the training and experience with the Shackleton from previous research dives, though none nearly as deep as this would be. My mouth went dry. "I'll do it." Evans studied me for a moment. "Are you sure, Mitchell? I know your history with deep water operations." "Someone has to go," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'm qualified, and I know the Shackleton systems better than most." "All right. You and Bennett will pilot. Harris, I want you monitoring from here. If those pressure anomalies Sarah's been tracking are real, I want to know about them before our people encounter anything unexpected." Michael nodded. "The Shackleton will be ready at 0400 hours, Evans continued. "That gives you both 6 hours to rest and prepare. This is going to be a dangerous mission, even without your personal concerns, Mitchell. I need you both at your best." "Yes, sir," Sarah and I responded in unison. As we left the command center, Sarah put her hand on my shoulder. "You didn't have to volunteer, Tom. I know how you feel about the deep." I gave her a weak smile. "Like I said, someone has to go." "Well, I'm glad it's you. There's no one else I'd rather have piloting with me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked back to my room to get ready, I kept thinking about the Koan stuck in the dark, with everyone on board still hoping someone would find them. I was scared, but I knew I'd made the right choice. In 6 hours, I'd be heading down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and whatever was waiting for me in the dark water below. I met Yuki at 0400 sharp outside the submersible bay. The Shackleton waited for us, our deep-sea sub with its tough titanium hull. 6 hours of tossing and turning had done little to calm my nerves. "First time going to full trench depth?" Yuki asked as she punched in the entry code for the bay. "That obvious, huh?" She gave me a small nod. "Your hands, they're shaking." I stuffed them into my pockets. "Just need some coffee." The preparation bay was busy even though it was early. 2 technicians ran final checks on the Shackleton's life support systems while another loaded emergency supplies into the storage compartments. Sarah was already there, talking with the chief engineer over a tablet. "Took you long enough," she said when she spotted us. "I've been reviewing the descent calculations. We need to modify our ballast ratio to account for the extreme depth." Yuki moved immediately to the external hull, running her hands along the pressure seals. I followed her lead, grateful for the distraction of routine checks. "You've been down this deep before?" I asked, testing the primary oxygen valves. "Twice." She moved methodically from one system to the next, once in the Puerto Rico Trench and once here about 15 kilometers north of where we're headed today. "And it went smoothly? Both times?" She paused, considering her answer. "The Puerto Rico dive was textbook. The Mariana dive..." Her hands continued working, checking the rescue winch mechanisms. "We lost hydraulics at about 10,000 meters. Had to surface manually." My stomach clenched. What caused it? Never determined conclusively. Pressure fluctuations, maybe. She must have noticed my expression because she added, "That was with older technology. The Shackleton has redundant systems for everything critical. For the next 5 hours, we got the submersible ready. I checked and double-checked the life support, navigation, and communication systems, while Yuki focused on the rescue equipment and external mechanisms. Sarah coordinated with the Challenger's bridge, relaying updates on the Koan's status. Oxygen levels dropping faster than projected, she reported at one point. They're down to about 16 hours now. As launch time approached, Captain Evans came to the bay for a final briefing. "The plan is straightforward," he said, pointing to a topographical map of the seafloor. "You'll descend directly to these coordinates. Based on the Kotoku's data, the Koan is wedged in this narrow crevice. Your job is to attach the rescue cable, guide them out, and bring everyone back to the surface." "What about those pressure anomalies?" I asked. Evans looked at Sarah. "We've been watching them. They're all grouped about 3 kilometers from where you're headed. You should be fine, but keep your sensors on." "And if we do encounter anomalies?" Yuki asked. "Use your judgment. The priority is rescuing those scientists, but not at the expense of your safety." At 0650, we made our final preparations. Yuki and I climbed into the Shackleton, taking our spots in the pilot and co-pilot seats. The inside was cramped but practical, with screens all around us and a big window in front. "Last chance to back out," Yuki said as she initiated the pre-launch sequence. I shook my head. "I'm good." "Descent profile loaded," she continued, all business now. "Life support optimal, rescue equipment ready." From the external speaker, I heard the bay controller's voice. "Shackleton, you are cleared for launch. Opening bay doors now?" "Roger that," Yuki responded. "Beginning launch sequence." Water filled the launch bay as the exterior doors opened. I felt sweat beading on my forehead as the Shackleton detached from its moorings and began to float. "Launching in 3, 2, 1. Yuki activated the descent thrusters and we sank into the dark water. The Challenger's lights lit up our first part of going down, but they quickly got dim as we went deeper. The outside lights turned on by themselves, shining blue light into the dark water in front of us. "Passing 1,000 meters, Yuki announced, her voice calm and methodical. I focused on the monitoring systems, watching depth readings tick upward and pressure measurements climb steadily. The hull creaked occasionally, normal flexing as we descended. "So," Yuki said after several minutes of silence, "what brings a man afraid of the deep to the deepest place on Earth?" I continued watching my monitors. "Who says I'm afraid?" "Your file mentions deep water anxiety issues. Plus, you look like you're about to pass out." I exhaled slowly. "I had an incident during graduate work. Research dive off the coast of Chile. Equipment failure at 700 meters. "How long were you stuck?" 6 hours. Backup systems kept me alive, but..." I trailed off, remembering the absolute darkness after my lights failed, the growing cold as systems shut down one by one, the certainty that each breath might be my last. "You don't need to explain," Yuki said. "I get it." She told me about her first solo dive off the coast of Okinawa. She'd grown up there watching her dad's boat go out to sea each morning. "I was certified for 500 meters, but I went to 750 because I was young and stupid," she said with a small laugh. My oxygen recycler started making this high-pitched noise, like a tea kettle, but much worse. I was sure it was about to explode. What happened? A loose filter cap. Fixed it in about 10 seconds once I calmed down enough to think. She adjusted our descent angle slightly. But those 10 seconds of pure panic, I still remember them perfectly. As we kept going down, Yuki told us more stories from her 12 years working in the deep sea. She talked about glowing sea creatures, hot vents on the ocean floor, and how it got really quiet the deeper we went. 5,000 meters, she announced. "Halfway there." I checked our communication link. "Challenger, this is Shackleton. Status report. All systems normal. Descended to 5,000 meters. Captain Evans's voice came back clear but with slight static. "Roger that, Shackleton. The Koan reports oxygen reserves at 14 hours remaining. Continue descent. The crushing reality of our depth pressed against my consciousness with each passing minute. At 5,000 meters, we had more water above us than Mount Everest had height. The pressure outside would flatten a human body instantly. 7,000 meters, Yuki said sometime later, entering the Hadal zone. I'd studied the deepest part of the ocean for years. It's a place so harsh that we know less about it than Mars, but life still exists down there in some really weird forms. See-through fish with huge jaws, bright red shrimp that can handle pressures that would flatten a submarine, bacteria that live in conditions nothing else could survive. Challenger, Shackleton reporting depth 8,500 meters, I said into the comm system. The response came back garbled. Challenger, please repeat. You're breaking up. Shack, on, Contin, descent, Koan, oxygen, 12 hours. Yuki adjusted the communication settings. We're getting into the interference zone. We'll lose clear contact soon. Great, I muttered. Don't worry. The locational beacon will still function. They'll know where we are even if we can't talk to them. At 9,000 meters, the communication turned to nothing but static. We kept going in silence, with only the sound of the Shackleton systems and the occasional creak of the hull. 10,000 meters, Yuki announced, approaching maximum recorded depth. The darkness outside was complete now, our lights only showing a few meters ahead. Bits of marine snow drifted past our window as we kept moving. There, Yuki pointed suddenly. Sonar's picking up the Koan. I checked the instruments. 10,900 meters in closing. We should have visual soon. Our external lights caught the first glimpse of metal at 10,110 meters, a flash of reflective surface stuck in the wall of a narrow trench. As we moved closer, the Koan came fully into view. A round research submersible jammed into a tight crack in the rock face, its hull clearly damaged along one side. Koan, this is the Shackleton, I transmitted on the emergency frequency. Do you copy? The video screen flickered to life, showing 4 haggard faces crowded together. An older Japanese man spoke, his voice strained but controlled. This is Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka of the Koan. Thank you for coming. His English was precise despite the obvious stress. Our situation is deteriorating quickly. We're here to get you out, I assured him. What's your status? Oxygen at critical levels. Life support failing. Hull integrity compromised in Section 3. He paused. And something is wrong with our instruments. What kind of wrong? Yuki asked, already maneuvering the Shackleton into position above the Koan. They show impossible readings. Pressure fluctuations that violate physics. Temperature drops to near absolute zero, then back to normal within seconds. I exchanged a glance with Yuki. When did these readings start? Approximately 1 hour ago. Shortly after we detected... He trailed off, looking to his colleagues. Detected what? I prompted. Movement. Large-scale movement below us. Our sonar registered a mass of significant size, but with properties unlike anything we've encountered. I was really nervous as we approached in the Shackleton. We need to move quickly. We're positioning to attach the rescue cable now. Yuki turned on the external robot arms. I'll need to get within 2 meters of their upper hatch to secure the connection. She moved our vessel really carefully, bringing us right over the Koan's emergency attachment point. The robot arm stretched out and grabbed the connector on our rescue cable. Almost there, she murmured, her concentration absolute. That's when our sonar pinged with a new contact. What is that? I leaned forward, adjusting the settings. There's something below us. It's big. Yuki didn't look away from her work. How big? I stared at the readings, checking the system again to make sure it wasn't an error. Massive, and moving upward. The water around us got darker, like our external lights were fading. I checked the power readings. Normal. This wasn't equipment failure. On the video screen, Dr. Tanaka's face suddenly changed. His eyes widened as he looked past his viewport toward something below. The other scientists began pointing frantically, looking like they were shouting though we couldn't hear them. "What are they seeing?" I asked, even as dread pooled in my stomach. "Thomas." Yuki's voice had lost its calm edge. "Look." I turned toward our viewport, following where she was looking downward. At first I saw nothing but darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I realized the darkness itself was moving, flowing, changing. A huge shape came out of the deep water below us, something that bent the light around its edges. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It looked solid and liquid at the same time, with corners that seemed to fold into themselves in ways that hurt my eyes. Bright spots pulsed across its surface in patterns that made no sense. As it rose toward us, I knew what I was seeing couldn't be real, not in the world as I knew it. The thing moved up and down beneath our boats, so big I couldn't wrap my head around it. It clearly didn't belong here, but there it was. As it came up toward us, I realized that what I was seeing couldn't be real. The thing moved under our boats, so huge I couldn't wrap my head around it. It didn't belong here, but it was definitely there. I held onto the controls of the Shackleton until my fingers hurt. The boat tipped as the thing pushed water all around us, making new currents out of nowhere. Warning lights lit up all over the console. "Stabilizing thrusters engaged," I said, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. The creature kept moving up. It moved weirdly smoothly for something so big, bending in ways that didn't make sense, like parts of it were somewhere I couldn't see. On our video link, Dr. Tanaka was right up against the koan's window. Everyone else backed away in a group, scared, but Tanaka just kept staring. His eyes got big as he watched the pulsing lights coming from the thing's surface. Those lights? I wanted to look away, but couldn't. They blinked in patterns that seemed to follow some kind of order I almost understood. Blue-green glowing spots arranged in shapes that seemed to change the more I looked. They weren't just lights. They were sending some kind of message. I blinked, and everything changed. When I opened my eyes, the Shackleton looked wrong. The control panel looked wobbly, with buttons and switches moving around. The metal walls seemed to move in and out. My navigation screen showed weird symbols I'd never seen before. I blinked again, and things mostly went back to normal. The controls were solid again, but not exactly like before. Something was different about them that I couldn't quite figure out. "Yuki," I managed to say. "Do you see... concentrating?" She cut me off, her voice tight. Her hands worked the external manipulator controls with practiced precision, but I noticed her lips moving continuously. She was whispering something. I leaned closer, trying to make out her words without taking my eyes off the thing below us. "Non-Euclidean transitional phasing requires 7-dimensional counterbalance," she murmured, the words making no sense to me. "Asymptotic convergence at the boundary condition." These weren't phrases from any operation manual I knew. They sounded like advanced physics stuff, way over my head math-wise. "Almost there," she said louder, addressing me while still working the controls. The manipulator arms extended toward the koan's emergency attachment point, the rescue cable within inches of connection. A sudden movement drew my attention back to the video feed. Dr. Tanaka had placed both palms flat against the viewport, his face now inches from the glass. His colleagues appeared to be trying to pull him back, but he resisted them with unnatural strength. The entity below us pulsed, its light patterns accelerating. A tendril of its substance, neither liquid nor solid, but somehow both, rose directly between our two submersibles. "Hurry!" I urged Yuki, fighting to keep the Shackleton stable as new currents buffeted us. "Cable locked," she announced just as the tendril touched the koan's hull. Dr. Tanaka began to scream. The sound came through our audio feed, but it didn't stop there. It tore through the Shackleton's hull, shaking the metal and going right into my bones. It wasn't just loud. It was wrong, like it had notes no person should be able to hear. My teeth hurt, and I could taste metal in my mouth. On the video feed, dark lines spread across Tanaka's skin, starting at his fingertips where they touched the viewport. The lines split like veins, but they didn't follow any pattern I knew. They moved up his arms, hit his neck, and covered his face. The other team members backed away as Tanaka's face started to change. His features seemed to melt, like his skin had turned to liquid. His mouth stretched wider than any human mouth should. His eyes bulged, then multiplied. I wasn't seeing things. His body was changing in ways that shouldn't be possible. "Thomas!" Yuki's voice cut through my horror. "Help me initiate ascent!" I focused on the controls again. The rescue cable was attached, but we needed to get the koan out of the crack before we could start going up. I turned on the winch, pulling the cable tight while Yuki moved us into position. But the thing wasn't done yet. More of those snake-like arms rose up around us, wrapping around both subs. Where they touched the Shackleton's hull, frost patterns showed up on our window, ice crystals that kept growing and changing as I looked at them. One of those arms pressed against our outside camera, and our video feed from the koan turned into weird repeating patterns that kept splitting into smaller copies of the same image. "What is that thing?" I asked, knowing Yuki couldn't possibly have an answer. "Non-locally manifesting higher dimensional intersection," she replied without hesitation, as if reciting a definition. Her voice had changed, becoming flat and precise. "Our three-dimensional space-time can only perceive a projection of its true form." I stared at her, momentarily forgetting the horror outside. How could she know that? How could anyone know that? "Emergency ascent protocol engaged," she announced suddenly, her fingers flying over the controls. "Maximum thrust. Hold on." The Shackleton's engines roared to life, pulling against the thing's weight. The rescue cable got tight as we pulled the koan from where it was stuck. Warning alarms went off as we pushed past the recommended limits on several systems. I tried to keep track of how we were rising, but my vision started breaking apart. Every light broke into rainbow-like beams. The control panel seemed to split into layers, each showing different readouts. Yuki seemed to leave trails when she moved, like I was seeing multiple versions of her at once. "Thomas!" Her voice came from everywhere at once. "You need to maintain consciousness. Focus on something constant." I tried to respond, but my mouth wouldn't form words. The pressure in the cabin fluctuated wildly, not just air pressure, but something more fundamental. Gravity itself seemed to waver, crushing me into my seat one moment and nearly lifting me from it the next. Yuki grabbed my arm with a tight grip. Her nails dug into my flesh, breaking skin. The sharp pain momentarily cleared my foggy thoughts. "Count with me," she instructed, her voice now coming from just one location again. 1, 2, 3. I tried to follow her count, but the numbers got all weird in my head. It was like the glowing stuff from that thing had messed with my brain, making me think stuff I couldn't shake off. My arm hurt worse as Yuki squeezed harder. I looked down at the small cuts where her nails dug into my skin. The blood was acting strange, just hanging there in the air. I started to black out, with my vision going dark around the edges. The last thing I saw was Yuki's face looking weirdly calm while everything went crazy around us. Her eyes were all bloodshot, but she kept working through the ascent steps like a robot. Then everything just broke apart, and I remembered nothing more. Pain woke me up. Not the sharp, specific kind that comes from an injury, but an all-over body ache that made even breathing hard. I opened my eyes to a blurry ceiling, trying to figure out where I was. "He's waking up again," a woman's voice said somewhere to my left. I turned my head and felt pain shoot through my neck. I saw Dr. Emma Phillips fixing something on the IV stand next to my bed. The medical bay of the Challenger slowly came into view. White walls, monitoring equipment, and the soft sound of air moving through the room. "What happened?" My voice came out as a dry rasp. "Try not to move too much. Dr. Phillips said, inserting a needle into my IV line. "This will help with the pain." I watched as she injected a clear liquid into the port. Almost immediately, a cool feeling spread up my arm, and the pain started to fade. "The koan?" I asked. "The rescue?" "Successful, more or less," she replied, not meeting my eyes as she checked my vital signs on a monitor. "Captain Evans will brief you when you're more stable." As the medication kicked in, I noticed other feelings besides the pain. My muscles felt stiff, like I hadn't moved in a long time. The bandages on my arms and chest were itchy, and my mouth was dry from not having enough water. I spotted a wall calendar, the type where you cross off each day. 5 days had been marked since we went down in the Shackleton. 5 days that were completely blank in my memory. "I've been unconscious for 5 days?" I asked, trying to piece together what had happened after... After what? My memory of the rescue attempt fragmented when I tried to access it. Flashes of light, Yuki's voice counting, a feeling of reality slipping away. Dr. Phillips nodded. "You were in and out. This is the first time you've been lucid enough for a real conversation." She handed me a cup of water. Small sips. The water tasted metallic but helped my dry throat. As I drank, I noticed bandages all over me. I pulled back the thin blanket and saw white gauze wrapped around my torso and some smaller bandages on my arms. "What happened to me?" I asked. "You sustained multiple lacerations during the ascent," Dr. Phillips explained, taking the cup from me when I finished. "Nothing too deep, fortunately. No major blood vessels were compromised." "Lacerations? From what?" She adjusted something on my monitor before answering. "Trauma during the rapid ascent. The submersible took significant damage. You were thrown against broken equipment, according to Yuki." Something felt off about her explanation, but I couldn't figure out why. My memories were all jumbled up, just random flashes with no connection. I could see the entity coming up from below, with its weird shape that didn't make sense, and the lights moving across it. I remember Dr. Tanaka screaming. After that, everything went blank. "Dr. Tanaka and the others?" I asked. "They're alive," Dr. Phillips said, her tone carefully neutral. She made a note in my chart and headed toward the door. "I need to inform the captain you're awake. Try to rest." Left alone, I tested my limbs carefully. Everything worked, but moving made my muscles hurt. I touched one of the bandages on my arm, feeling the cut underneath. The shape seemed planned, not like a random injury from getting thrown against equipment. I didn't have time to think about this more before the medical bay door opened again. Yuki Chen walked in, standing very straight with exact movements. Something about her had changed since I'd last seen her. She seemed more still than before. "Good to see you conscious," she said, stopping at the foot of my bed. Her voice held the same calm efficiency it had during our descent, but now it lacked any emotional undertone. "They tell me it's been 5 days," I said, studying her face. "No visible injuries, but the blood vessels in her eyes still showed the broken capillaries I remembered from our ascent, giving her sclera a reddish tint. 5 days, 7 hours, and approximately 22 minutes since we initiated emergency ascent protocols," she confirmed with unsettling precision. "What happened down there?" I asked. "After I lost consciousness?" Yuki looked around the room before turning back to me. "We finished the rescue operation even though we ran into some problems. We got the koan out and brought it up with the Shackleton." "Complications," I repeated. "You mean the thing we saw?" Something flickered across her expression, gone so quickly I couldn't identify it. "The deep ocean has a lot of weird stuff scientists haven't figured out yet. That wasn't a jellyfish or a new species of squid, Yuki. That was..." I struggled to find words that could describe what we'd encountered. "That was something impossible." "Impossibility is a limitation of perception, not of reality," she replied, her voice taking on that same flat quality I'd heard in the Shackleton when she'd spoken of non-Euclidean transitional phasing. Our three-dimensional sensory apparatus cannot properly interpret higher dimensional structures. I felt deeply unsettled as I stood in the medical bay. This wasn't the Yuki I'd descended with. The words coming out of her mouth belonged in an advanced theoretical physics seminar, not from a submersible pilot. "How did we get back to the surface?" I asked, trying a different approach. I initiated emergency ascent protocols and maintained optimal trajectory despite variable pressure conditions. Her gaze shifted slightly away from mine. The Shackleton's systems performed adequately until the final 1,000 meters, at which point multiple failures occurred simultaneously. And the Koan, Dr. Tanaka and his team? They were recovered. Their submersible sustained significant structural damage. Dr. Tanaka experienced an adverse physiological reaction to pressure anomalies. Her explanations gave me the facts, but left out the important stuff, like she was hiding something on purpose. Whenever she talked about going back up to the surface, she looked away from me, staring at the wall, the equipment, anywhere except my eyes. "You're not telling me everything," I said. Yuki's hands went to her left wrist, touching a pattern on her skin. I hadn't noticed her do this before. "I can't tell you everything while you're still recovering. Captain Evans will fill you in later." Before I could ask more, she turned stiffly and walked out of the room, moving weirdly. I lay back, trying to understand what just happened. This Yuki wasn't the same person who'd told me stories about her first dive off Okinawa. Something was different about her, like she wasn't quite herself anymore. I couldn't figure out what had changed, and not knowing scared me more than any answer would have. Hours went by. Dr. Phillips came back twice to check on me and change the IV bag, but she dodged all my questions with typical doctor talk. I slept on and off, having weird dreams full of strange lights and impossible shapes. I woke up to find Captain Evans standing by my bed, his face looking more worn out than I remembered. "Mitchell," he said with a nod. "Good to have you back with us." "Thank you, sir." I tried to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at my bandaged cuts. Evans pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. Unlike Dr. Phillips and Yuki, he looked me directly in the eyes, but I didn't like what I saw. He seemed wary and careful in a way he hadn't been before. "I need your account of what happened during the rescue operation," he said, "as much as you can remember." I described our descent, finding the Koan, and the appearance of the entity from below. Evans listened without interrupting me, his face blank even as I tried my best to explain what we'd seen that made no sense. When I mentioned how Dr. Tanaka's face had changed, his features rearranging themselves, Evans's jaw tightened slightly. "And after that?" he prompted when I paused. "I don't remember anything else. Everything just fell apart. Yuki was counting, trying to keep me focused, but reality stopped making sense." I rubbed at my temple, feeling a headache building. The next thing I knew, I was waking up here. Evans nodded slowly. "That aligns with what we could salvage from your mission logs." Salvage. All data from the Shackleton's external cameras and sensors was corrupted upon return. Same with the Koan systems. We have fragments of audio, some partial environmental readings, but nothing conclusive. "That's convenient," I said, immediately regretting my tone when Evans's eyes narrowed. "You think this situation is convenient, Mitchell?" His voice remained level, but I caught the edge beneath it. "I have one submersible with catastrophic damage, 4 Japanese researchers in various states of medical distress, and half a dozen crew members exhibiting symptoms we can't explain." "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" He waved away my apology. "Dr. Tanaka is currently quarantined in a separate medical facility on board. His condition is, unique." "I'd like to see him," I said. "That's not possible at this time. Dr. Phillips has implemented strict isolation protocols." "What about the others from the Koan?" Evans stood, straightening his uniform. 2 were stable but unresponsive. The 4th took his own life 36 hours after rescue. I felt stunned by his words. He what? Hanged himself using bedsheets. Left no note, no explanation. Evans moved toward the door. We're on an emergency return course to Guam. ETA 3 days. Once there, proper authorities will take over this investigation. Investigation? Of what? Evans paused at the door. Whatever happened down there wasn't just an equipment malfunction or a new marine species, Mitchell. You know that better than most. He turned back to face me. Rest. Recover. We'll talk more when you're stronger. After he left, I sat in silence, trying to process everything. A member of the Koan's crew had killed himself. Dr. Tanaka was quarantined. Yuki had changed in ways I couldn't really explain. And through it all, I kept coming back to that thing we'd encountered, something so weird that just seeing it had messed with my head. In the medical bay, I suddenly realized my hand was moving against my left wrist, fingers tracing a pattern on my skin. I hadn't meant to do this, but my fingers moved like they had a mind of their own, following a specific sequence. I made myself stop, freaked out by this automatic movement. It was the same pattern Yuki had traced. That thought made me feel sick. That evening, Dr. Phillips came to check on me one last time before lights out. As she fixed the bandages on my torso, I spotted something I'd missed before, her fingers moving against her own wrist. The same exact pattern. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She glanced down at her hand as if surprised to find it moving. "Oh, just a nervous habit. Seems like a specific pattern." Her expression remained neutral, professional. I hadn't noticed. She finished changing my bandages and stepped back. "You're healing well. If you continue to improve, we can move you back to your quarters tomorrow." "Can I see the submersible logs?" I asked. "The ones that weren't corrupted?" "That would be up to Captain Evans." She disposed of the old bandages and washed her hands methodically. "Is there anything else you need before I go?" I shook my head, watching as she left. Once alone, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, testing my strength. The pain was better now, dulled by medication and time. I stood carefully holding onto the bed rail until I was sure I wouldn't fall. The bathroom was only a few steps away, but the short walk left me winded. I leaned against the sink, catching my breath before looking up at the mirror. My reflection shocked me. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, 5 days' worth of stubble. But what caught my eye were the edges of bandages visible at the neckline of my medical gown. I needed to see what was underneath. I slowly peeled back the tape on one of the bandages on my forearm. Beneath it was a cut about 3 inches long, not deep, but straight, like it was made with a scalpel instead of from hitting broken equipment. I removed another bandage to find a similar cut, but at an angle to the first. I kept going, taking off every bandage I could reach, showing a network of cuts across my arms and torso. Standing before the mirror, I could now see them all together. Not random injuries, but a pattern. Geometric, deliberate. The cuts formed angles and intersections that seemed to map something across my skin. This wasn't from an accident, I whispered to my reflection. The pattern was too precise, too intentional. I couldn't have done this to myself, even in some weird blackout. And yet, as I stared at the lines etched into my skin, something about them seemed weirdly recognizable, like I should know what they meant. I traced one line with my finger, following it across my chest to where it crossed another cut at a perfect angle. The pain had dulled enough that I could focus on the pattern itself. As I looked at the cuts, I noticed something strange. The lines seemed to move slightly under my skin. I blinked, thinking it was just the light or my meds. But when I looked again, it was still happening. The lines pulsed. Not a lot, but they expanded and contracted in time with my heartbeat. Thump, expand, thump, contract. It matched perfectly. which couldn't just be random. I put my fingers against my neck, feeling my pulse. With each beat, the lines on my skin reacted, moving just barely but definitely there. What had happened to me down there? What had the entity done? I couldn't stop wondering as I looked at the weird pattern cut into my skin, a pattern connected to my heartbeat, to Yuki's changed behavior, to Dr. Phillips's unconscious tracing. I remembered what happened to Dr. Tanaka, the dark lines spreading across his skin as he pressed his hands against the viewport, lines that branched like veins but didn't follow any normal body pattern. I looked back at my reflection, at the cuts that now pulsed with each beat of my heart. They were the same patterns. I checked my pulse by touching my neck. With each beat, the lines on my skin moved a tiny bit, but they definitely moved. The bathroom mirror showed the truth. The geometric cuts on my body weren't random. They made the same pattern I'd seen on Dr. Tanaka's skin before I blacked out. I put the bandages back on carefully so Dr. Phillips wouldn't know I took them off. Back in bed at the medical bay, I stayed awake for hours, thinking the same questions over and over without finding answers. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. I had to look into what happened, starting with whatever data we still had from our encounter. Dr. Phillips let me go that afternoon and told me to rest and take it easy. As soon as she left me at my room, I went straight to the research lab instead. The Challenger was quieter than normal. Fewer people in the hallways, and those I saw moved weirdly. No one looked me in the eye. The lab was empty when I got there, which was perfect for me. I logged into the main computer and opened the mission data archive. The system confirmed what Captain Evans told me. Most of the data from both the Shackleton and the Koan was corrupted. All that was left were bits and pieces. I started with the external sensor logs, looking at environmental readings. Temperature data came up first, and I moved closer to the screen, not sure if I was seeing it right. According to these bits, the water temperature around our subs had dropped when the entity appeared, going from about 2 degrees Nelly to 270.3 degrees in less than 10 seconds. That couldn't happen. Water freezes at 0 degrees C normally. Even considering the extreme depths and pressure changes, nothing explains a temperature that close to absolute zero, 273.15 degrees, in the ocean. At that temperature, molecules barely move. Water would be more than frozen. It would be in a quantum state nobody had ever seen in nature. I ran a check on the temperature sensors, but the system said they were working fine during the dive. The readings weren't mistakes, or at least the equipment thought it was recording real conditions. Next, I looked at the sub's outside camera footage. All that was left were bursts of static mixed with fractals, patterns that repeated at different sizes, very similar to what I'd seen when the entity touched our camera. I couldn't get a single usable frame. The audio logs were just as weird. Most had only white noise, but one piece caught the moment Dr. Tanaka started screaming. I paused before playing it, then turned down the volume and pressed the button. The sound that came out wasn't human. It started as Tanaka's voice, but changed into something else. A layered vibration that seemed to have frequencies beyond what we can normally hear. My teeth started hurting just like they did in the sub. The lab lights flickered, and the computer itself restarted without warning. When the system came back on, a warning message showed that 3 other computers nearby had also crashed. The scream had somehow affected the electronic systems even as a recording. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. None of this made sense with what we know about physics, biology, or technology. Looking for answers? Michael Harris stood in the doorway with the corridor lights behind him. I hadn't heard him come up. Something like that, I replied, watching as he entered the lab. His movements seemed normal, not displaying the mechanical precision I'd noticed in Yuki and Dr. Phillips. I'm trying to understand what happened down there. Michael nodded and took a seat at the terminal next to mine. Captain Evans asked me to analyze the remaining data. I've been at it for 3 days. He rolled up his sleeves as he turned to his computer. That's when I noticed the marks on his forearm, red lines scratched into his skin, making angles and crossing patterns. "What happened to your arm?" I asked, keeping my voice casual despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. Michael looked down as if just noticing the scratches. "Oh, I've been doing that to let the pressure out." "Pressure?" "Inside my head, since we brought them back up." He resumed typing, apparently unconcerned. "The mathematics keeps building up. It needs somewhere to go." I stared at him, not knowing what to say. Michael had always been the most strictly logical person on the Challenger. Hearing him talk about mathematics building up, like it was a real thing, was really weird. "What mathematics are you talking about?" I asked. Michael's typing paused. "You've seen it too, in your dreams at least." His fingers resumed their work without him looking at the keyboard. "The patterns, the ones that were in its light, they keep repeating, growing, each one more complex than the last." My arm began to itch where the cut lines traced across my skin. I resisted the urge to scratch at them. "Have you found anything in the data?" I asked, redirecting the conversation. "Any explanation for what we encountered?" "Explanations require a common framework of understanding," Michael said, his voice flat. "We lack the cognitive architecture to contextualize what we experienced, like asking a two-dimensional being to describe a cube." He turned his monitor toward me. The screen showed a complicated 3D model spinning slowly, a strange geometric shape made of layered shapes that folded into each other in ways that hurt my brain to look at. "What is that?" I asked. "A simplified representation. The actual structure exists in more dimensions than we can perceive, but this gives an approximation." He tapped a key, and the model zoomed out to reveal that the structure I'd been looking at was just one node in a vastly larger network. "I've been reconstructing it based on sensor fragments and mathematical extrapolation." "You built this from the corrupted data?" Michael smiled thinly. "No, I built it from memory." I stood up and backed away. "You couldn't possibly remember something this complex from a brief encounter." "Not with normal human memory capacity, no." His eyes remained fixed on the rotating model. "But things have changed, Thomas. My mind works differently now. Faster, clearer. I see connections I never could before." I needed to leave. Something was very wrong with Michael, just as it was with Yuki and Dr. Phillips. But before I left, I needed one piece of information. "Where are they keeping Dr. Tanaka?" "Medical isolation ward, C." Michael didn't look away from his screen. "Level 3 security clearance required for entry." I thanked him and left quickly, feeling him watching me as I walked out of the lab. The isolation ward was in a restricted section of the medical bay. Getting in would be hard without proper clearance, but I knew the Challenger's systems and rules well enough to find a way in. I spent the next few hours watching the medical staff's rotation schedule. During shift change, there was a short window when the junior technician, Lee, was alone at the desk. I'd worked with Lee on previous trips. He was careful but wanted to impress higher-ranking scientists. When the time came, I walked up to the desk confidently. "Lee, I need 5 minutes with Dr. Tanaka," I said without preamble. "Captain's orders." Lee made a face, checking his tablet. "I don't have any authorization for that, Dr. Mitchell. It just came through. Evans is concerned about potential contamination vectors." I held up my own tablet, which displayed a fabricated report I'd created. "We need to check for specific biomarkers that might explain the spread of symptoms among the crew." Lee hesitated, glancing between me and his security console. Dr. Phillips was very clear about isolation protocols. "This comes directly from the captain, Lee. 5 minutes, observed through the quarantine glass, no physical contact." I maintained eye contact, projecting confidence I didn't feel. "You can call Evans to confirm if you want, but he's in the middle of coordinating our emergency return to Guam." After another moment's hesitation, Lee nodded and swiped his access card. 5 minutes only, Dr. Mitchell. I'll have to note this in the log." "Of course," I agreed, moving past him toward the isolation chamber. A short hallway opened into a viewing spot with thick glass separating us from the patient room. On the other side, the room was plain white with just a bed and some medical equipment. Dr. Tanaka was sitting on the edge of the bed, not moving at all, with his back to us. I could see the strange patterns on his neck and arms from where I stood. Dark lines that really showed up against his light skin. They looked like the same weird marks I'd found on my own body, but his were bigger and way more obvious. "Dr. Tanaka," I called through the intercom. "It's Thomas Mitchell from the rescue mission." No response. He remained motionless, not even his breathing visible. "Dr. Tanaka, I need to ask you about what happened in the koan, about what you saw before we arrived." Still nothing. I was about to try again when he moved. He just sort of popped up to his feet. The way he moved looked weird. It was too smooth, like he didn't need to struggle to get up like normal people do. "Dr. Tanaka?" Slowly, he turned to face me. I stepped back, my back hitting the wall. Tanaka's face looked completely wrong. His left eye sat higher than his right, and his mouth stretched too far on one side. Even worse was how his face seemed to move, like his features were in multiple places at once, making a blur that I couldn't make sense of. The lines I'd seen on his neck now ran all over his face, making a pattern that pulled and twisted his skin in different directions. Where the lines crossed, his skin folded inward at angles that just shouldn't be possible on a person's face. "Can you understand me?" I asked, my voice barely audible even to myself. Tanaka's head tilted at an unnatural angle. His mouth opened, and I got ready for another scream that would mess with reality. Instead, he talked in a strange voice that sounded like multiple people speaking at once. Understanding requires equivalence of perception. You remain bound to three-dimensional sensory processing. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Expansion." His misaligned eyes fixed on me. The entity remapped my neural architecture to accommodate higher dimensional information processing. Are you still human?" He made a sound that was almost like laughter, but it sounded off somehow. "Being human is just one small way of thinking. I still remember what it felt like, but I've gone beyond those limitations now." "The patterns," I said, pulling back my sleeve to reveal my own geometric cuts. "They're all over the crew. What do they mean?" Tanaka's distorted face pressed closer to the glass. "The patterns are pathways, access points. The thing exists in multiple dimensions but needs actual physical spots in our world to stay connected. Contact for what purpose? Purpose implies linear causality. The entity does not operate within such constraints." His mouth stretched wider. "But if translation is necessary, to teach, to transform, to elevate. One of your crew killed himself," I said. "That's not elevation." "Transition is not universal. Some cognitive architectures collapse under dimensionally expanded awareness." I was about to ask another question when the intercom clicked off. Through the door, I heard Lee's voice. "Dr. Mitchell, your 5 minutes are up." I looked back at Tanaka, who had gone back to his original spot on the bed, back turned, completely still, like our conversation never happened. Walking back to my quarters, I tried to make sense of what I'd learned. The entity wasn't just some deep-sea creature. It was something from beyond our normal reality. Being near it had changed people who encountered it, rewiring their biology and thinking patterns into shapes that worked as access points. Access points for what? Communication? Control? Transformation? I got to my cabin completely wiped out. After punching in my code, I opened the door and found someone already inside, Sarah Bennett, sitting stiffly on the edge of my bed. She barely moved as she turned to look at me. "Thomas," she said, her voice lacking the warmth it once held. "I've been waiting for you." "How did you get in here?" I asked, remaining in the doorway. "Access codes are patterns. All patterns are mathematically derivable if you understand the underlying structures." She stood with that same unnatural fluidity I'd seen in Tanaka. "I needed to speak with you," About what? About the dreams. Her hand moved to her arm, scratching at the fabric of her sleeve. About the mathematics beneath reality. I noticed blood seeping through the fabric where she scratched. Sarah, you're hurting yourself. She looked down at her arm like it didn't even matter. The pain is worth it. It helps me see things clearly. Sarah rolled up her sleeve, showing the same geometric pattern I recognized on her skin. But unlike my wounds, which looked like they happened all at once, hers were in different stages, some still bleeding, others with scabs or old scars from picking at them over and over. The dreams began 3 nights ago, she continued, seemingly unconcerned about the blood. Recursive sequences that reveal the mathematical underpinnings of physical reality. Each night the patterns grow more complex, more beautiful. Sarah, I said carefully. Something happened to us down there. To all of us who were exposed to the entity. These aren't just dreams. Something is changing in our minds and our bodies. Yes. Her expression brightened with an approximation of her old enthusiasm, though it didn't reach her eyes. Exactly. We're being reconfigured to process higher dimensional information. Our brains are being rewired, neuron by neuron. That doesn't concern you? Concern requires uncertainty about outcomes. I have none. She took a step toward me. In my dream last night, I saw what we're becoming, Thomas. I saw beyond the veil of 3-dimensional space-time into a reality so vast, so intricate, that human language cannot contain it. As she spoke, she continued scratching her arm, digging deeper until fresh blood ran freely down her wrist. Her face showed no pain, only an intense focus. The entity, she went on, it's not a creature as we understand life. It's a nexus point where multiple dimensional planes intersect with our reality. Its appearance in the trench wasn't coincidence. It was mathematics. Probability curves converging at exact coordinates in space-time. I took a step toward her, reaching for her bleeding arm. Let me help you with that. Sarah pulled back really fast. No, the patterns must be maintained. They're calibrating, Thomas. Connecting our brains to the frequencies of the entity. Sarah, listen to yourself. This isn't you talking. This isn't the scientist I know. I am more myself than I have ever been. Her eyes fixed on mine with unsettling intensity. Science seeks understanding of reality. I understand more now than all of human science combined. The entity showed me equations that unify quantum mechanics and relativity. It revealed mathematical proofs that resolve paradoxes we've struggled with for centuries. As she spoke, I noticed her movements getting smoother and more exact, like she suddenly knew exactly what she was doing. You should embrace the change, Thomas, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It hurts at first, yes. The human mind wasn't designed to comprehend dimensional mathematics, but once you stop resisting, once you allow the patterns to complete themselves. Her expression shifted into something approaching reverence. It's beautiful, like seeing colors that have always existed but were beyond your perception. I've seen Dr. Tanaka, I countered. What's happening to him isn't beautiful. It's a transformation that's destroying his humanity. Sarah's head tilted at the same unnatural angle I'd seen from Tanaka. Destruction implies loss. This is addition, not subtraction. We aren't losing our humanity. We're transcending its limitations. She moved toward the door, taking very even steps. The change is already within you, Thomas. I can see the patterns beginning to align in your mind. Soon you'll understand. As she reached the doorway, she turned back. 3 days until we reach Guam. By then, enough of us will have completed the transition. We'll be ready to extend the pattern. Extend it how? I asked. But Sarah had already slipped out into the corridor, leaving only a few drops of blood on my floor as evidence she'd been there at all. I locked the door and fell onto my bed, my thoughts all over the place. The thing in the trench wasn't just alone down there. It was spreading through us, through the weird marks it had somehow put on our bodies and minds. It was changing us, getting us ready for something. The cuts on my skin started to itch again, and I noticed my fingers moving toward them, wanting to scratch and make the patterns deeper like Sarah had done. I pulled my hand back. 3 days until we got to Guam. 3 days to figure out what was happening to everyone on the Challenger, and to stop it before whatever this thing was could reach the mainland. 2 days after my conversation with Sarah, I sat in my quarters looking at a chart I'd made on my tablet. 7 names lined the left column, each with notes tracking how they were getting worse. 7 crew members who now had those strange geometric patterns on their skin, who traced invisible math on their wrists, who talked about dimensional constants and weird geometries. I'd been documenting everything, recording conversations, taking pictures of the spreading marks, noting behavior changes, the way they moved so precisely, how they all used the same phrases about higher dimensional information processing and mathematical underpinnings of reality, how none of them seemed worried about their own health anymore. My own cuts had started to heal, but they still itched all the time. Sometimes I caught myself scratching at them without thinking, making the patterns deeper. Each time I had to grab my own hand to stop. The tablet screen blurred as my eyes lost focus. I hadn't really slept in 2 days. How could I, when every time I closed my eyes the patterns showed up, geometric shapes expanding and shrinking, folding through dimensions I couldn't quite see? The ship's announcement system made a crackling sound. "This is Captain Evans. We remain on emergency protocol. Estimated arrival at Guam in 3 days, 4 hours. All crew are required to report for medical evaluation according to the schedule posted in each section. That is all." His voice sounded strained, like he was trying to be in charge but was worn out. At least he still wasn't showing symptoms. Yesterday, when I told him what I'd found about the spreading condition, he put everyone in quarantine right away and had us speed up toward Guam even though it would burn more fuel. I grabbed my tablet and walked to the research lab. The hallways of the Challenger seemed different now, quieter, with crew members walking too stiffly instead of the normal, relaxed way they used to move. Those who had symptoms just gave me quick nods, moving like robots. The ones who didn't have symptoms yet, not many left now, stuck close to the walls and wouldn't look at anyone. In the lab, I set up the blood testing equipment and got a sample from my arm. Since finding the geometric patterns on my skin, I'd been testing my blood, trying to see if anything weird was happening to my cells. The microscope made a low noise as I put the fresh sample on the slide. Looking through the eyepiece, my blood cells seemed normal at first. Red cells floating in plasma with some white cells here and there. But when I zoomed in all the way, I saw the strange stuff again. Tiny crystal-like structures were floating between my blood cells, things I couldn't find in any medical book. They had geometric shapes, like tiny versions of the patterns on my skin, but the way they behaved freaked me out the most. When I looked right at one structure, it stayed in one spot and shape. But every time I blinked or looked away and back again, the structures were in different positions, different angles, different spots, like they only became fixed when someone was watching them. Quantum particles did this, existing as waves of possibility until someone looked at them. But quantum stuff wasn't supposed to be visible at our level, and definitely not in blood at room temperature, unless something had changed the basic rules. I recorded how the structures behaved, tracking how they rearranged themselves during the split second when I blinked. Each new pattern seemed connected to the growing designs of the larger network. These changes weren't random. They followed math patterns I could almost figure out, but not quite. After 2 hours of looking, I sat back from the microscope and rubbed my eyes. I was starting to form a theory that went against normal physics, but matched everything we'd seen since we found that thing in the trench. What if that entity existed in more than 3 dimensions? What if, by touching it, we'd become doorways for forces from higher dimensions to enter our 3D world? I turned to my computer and started writing. Working theory. The entity encountered at 10,010 depth exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions beyond our perceivable reality. Contact with this entity has altered human biology at the quantum level, allowing higher dimensional structures to manifest within three-dimensional substrates, i.e., our bodies. The geometric patterns represent mathematical formulas that facilitate this dimensional bridging. The behavioral changes observed in affected crew members may indicate restructuring of neural pathways to accommodate processing of higher dimensional information that human brains were never evolved to handle. This would explain the obsession with mathematical patterns, the mechanical precision of movement, and the apparent loss of emotion or conventional human behavior. I stopped and thought for a moment. If I was right, this thing wasn't just changing people. It was using them to break into our world. Everyone who got affected became like a radio picking up broadcasts from somewhere else. And if this spread beyond the ship, I needed to call the mainland, tell someone what we might be bringing back with us. I ran to the comms room on the upper deck. The door was open, but inside everything was torn apart. The wall panels were off, with wires hanging out everywhere. The main radio was in pieces all over the floor. In the middle of the room was Yuki, her hands moving way too fast as she put the pieces together into something new, a weird branching structure that kept growing from the center. "Yuki," I said, stunned by the destruction of our communication equipment, "what have you done?" She turned to me real quick. The blood vessels in her eyes looked darker now, making the whites look almost black. "I'm establishing a proper transmission array," she replied, her voice eerily calm. "Standard radio technology is insufficient for higher dimensional signal propagation. You've destroyed our only link to the mainland. Three-dimensional communication has become obsolete." Her fingers continued their work, twisting wires and circuit components into impossible configurations. "It needs to hear us, all of us, across the dimensional boundary." "What needs to hear us?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The entity, the nexus point, the intersection." Her head tilted at that now familiar, unnatural angle. "It reached through to us. Now we must reach back." I took a step toward the door. "I need to tell the captain. Captain Evans no longer commands this vessel." Yuki's hands paused in their work. "Authority structures require common frameworks of understanding. Those frameworks no longer apply." I backed away from her, then turned and ran toward the bridge. I needed to find Captain Evans, to warn him that things had gotten worse than we'd expected. If Yuki had disabled communications, what else might the affected crew members be planning? The corridors felt longer as I ran, like the distances were bigger than I knew they actually were. It was my mind playing tricks on me, I told myself. Whatever was in my blood was messing with how I saw things. I reached the bridge and pushed through the door without waiting. "Captain, we have a situation." The captain's chair was empty. In fact, the entire bridge was deserted except for one person, Sarah Bennett, standing in front of the big window. She had her back to me and was standing weirdly stiff as she looked out at the ocean. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's Captain Evans?" She didn't respond immediately. When she did begin to turn, her movement looked off, jerky but smooth at the same time, like different parts of her body were turning separately from each other. "The captain is being prepared," she said, her voice layered with harmonics that hadn't been present before. "As are the others." Her face came into view, and I had to grab the nearest console to keep from falling backward. Her features had changed, looking just like what I'd seen happen to Dr. Tanaka. Her left eye sat higher than her right, and her mouth stretched too far on one side. But worse, her face seemed to be in multiple places at once, like I was seeing several slight movements all happening together. Where her normal face used to be was now a grid of lines, the geometric pattern in its final stage. At the points where these lines crossed, her skin folded inward, making impossible angles on what used to be a human face. "It's beautiful once you understand," Sarah said, her voice emanating from a mouth that opened wider than human anatomy should allow. "I didn't see it at first either, Thomas. The dimensional mathematics seemed impossible, incomprehensible, but then I stopped trying to force it into three-dimensional constraints." "Sarah," I said, taking a step back for each step she took forward, "this isn't you. Whatever that thing did to us in the trench, it's changing you, changing all of us." Change implies difference from an original state. Her head rotated slightly without her neck moving. "This is revelation, not alteration. The patterns were always there, in the quantum substrate of reality. We simply couldn't perceive them." She raised her hands toward me, and I watched in horror as they changed, her fingers breaking apart, bending weirdly, then coming back together in new ways as she moved. "You're nearly there yourself, Thomas," she said. "I can see the patterns aligning in your mind. Just let go of the constraints. Let the mathematics flow through you." Her fingers reached for my face, stretching way longer than should be possible as her skin kept breaking apart. Her body was changing in ways that made no sense. "Don't fight it," she whispered as her transformed hands drew closer. "No one can fight it. The entity exists in all possible dimensions simultaneously. It's already inside you, already rewriting what you are at the quantum level." I backed against the door, trying to grab the handle behind me. Sarah smiled way too wide. Her eyes looked different now, and I could see the weird glowing patterns from that thing in the trench reflected in them. "Join us," she said, her voice now a chorus of overlapping tones. "Understand the mathematics beneath reality." I slammed the bridge door shut just as Sarah's impossible fingers reached for my face. Her hand caught in the closing door, but instead of hearing the expected scream, her fingers simply detached, falling to the floor where they continued to move on their own across the metal. I ran. My boots pounded against the corridor floor as alarms suddenly blared throughout the Challenger. The sound cut through the weird quiet that had filled the ship over the past days. Its wailing rise and fall matching my ragged breathing as I sprinted toward the research labs on the lower deck. The ship lurched beneath me. I stumbled against the wall, catching myself as the deck plates vibrated. The engine's steady noise that I usually ignored faded to silence. We were dead in the water. I passed the mess hall where two crew members sat perfectly still, their bodies angled in ways human spines shouldn't bend. They watched me with eyes that moved independently of each other but made no move to come after me. Not yet. The research lab was my only option. It contained equipment we might use to understand what was happening. And more importantly, it had reinforced doors designed to contain hazardous materials. I rounded the final corner and nearly collided with Ryan Wilson. His eyes were wide with panic, his communications uniform torn at the shoulder. "Mitchell!" He grabbed my arm. "What the hell is happening? I just saw Kowalski crawling on the ceiling. Literally on the ceiling." I pulled him along with me toward the lab. "No time to explain. We need to get somewhere secure." "The engines are down," Ryan said, keeping pace. "I tried calling the mainland, but comms are completely fried. Yuki did something to the equipment." We reached the lab doors. I punched in my access code with trembling fingers. The doors slid open to reveal two people already inside, Dr. Phillips and a junior engineer named Martinez. Phillips was bent over a microscope while Martinez was frantically gathering equipment. "Lock it down," I told Ryan as we entered. "Everything. Security Protocol 7. Ryan moved to the main terminal and started the lockdown sequence while I turned to Phillips. Dark red lines showed at her collar and moved up her neck, the start of the pattern. Her eyes still looked clear and focused. "I've been studying my own blood samples," she said without preamble. "The crystalline structures are multiplying. They're changing the cellular composition at the quantum level." Martinez looked up from the storage cabinet where he was collecting tools. "I weld this door shut, yes? They're coming. I saw them in the corridor." I nodded, and he moved to the entrance with a portable welding kit. The lab had two doors. the main entrance, and a smaller emergency exit. Both would need to be secured. "How long have you been here?" I asked Phillips. "About an hour." After Captain Evans started, she trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to scratch at the pattern on her neck before she caught herself. "He's one of them now." Started ordering the unaffected crew into the cargo hold, said it was for necessary preparation. Martinez and I ran here instead. A thud against the outer door caught our attention. Through the small, reinforced window, I saw Michael Harris staring in at us. Or rather, what used to be Michael Harris. His body looked weird as it stretched out way too long one second, then squished down the next like his bones could bend in places they shouldn't. But his face kept that same calm look that all the changed crew had. "Ryan," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are we?" He looked up from the terminal. "Middle of the Philippine Sea. About 3 days from Guam if we had engines, which we don't." Martinez finished welding the main door and moved to the emergency exit. "This will hold for now, but not forever. What are these people? What's happened to the crew?" I took a breath, getting my thoughts together. "I think we ran into something in the Mariana Trench that exists in more dimensions than we can see. Something that's changing people, messing with them at their core." Phillips nodded. "The biological changes are nothing like anything in medical science. It's not just physical changes. Their brain patterns are being rewired. I took brain scans of Yuki yesterday before she refused any more tests. Her brain activity looked totally wrong." Another impact shook the main door. More faces appeared at the window. Sarah, Yuki, and others I knew, but whose features had started the same horrible changes. They moved against the glass in perfect unison, but in a messed up way, their arms and legs bending in ways they shouldn't. "They're not trying to kill us," I said, watching them. "They want to change us, to make us like them." "What's the plan?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. I turned to the lab equipment. "We study this, fast. If we can understand what's happening, maybe we can stop it." "I need more samples," Phillips said. "Blood, tissue, brain scans if possible." I rolled up my sleeve, exposing the geometric cuts. "Start with me. I'm infected, but still me, for now." Over the next hours, we worked like crazy as the banging on the doors kept coming again and again. Phillips took samples from both of us with the patterns, herself and me, while Martinez blocked the doors with whatever heavy stuff he could find. Ryan tried to get the lab's radio working, but said there was only static on all channels. Phillips and I bent over different desks, testing our samples. Looking through the microscope, I could see that the crystal-like stuff in my blood had grown since we last checked, making more complex patterns every hour. "Look at this," Phillips called, her voice strained. She had connected her neural scanner to a terminal displaying brain activity. The patterns in our thoughts. They match the crystalline structures in our blood, which match the patterns we carve into our skin. I moved to her station, looking at the display. She was right. The neural activity in her brain showed the same geometric patterns we could see in the blood sample and on our skin. "It's like a virus," I muttered, a theory forming. "A higher dimensional virus that uses mathematical formulas as its genetic code." Phillips nodded, scratching at her neck before catching herself. "But viruses need a vector, a way to transmit themselves from host to host. How is this spreading?" I thought back to the trench, to the creature's moving body and glowing patterns. "Light," I said suddenly. The patterns of light it gave off. They weren't just for communication. They were encoding information. Information our brains absorbed and began copying. "But why the compulsion to scratch the patterns into our skin?" Phillips asked. The answer hit me all at once. Because the entity exists in higher dimensions than we can see. It needs anchors in our world to stay connected. The patterns we make work like math formulas. They connect the dimensions. Martinez looked up from the emergency exit. "So they're like Antennas? Receiving signals from elsewhere? Exactly. I turned to the equipment cabinets, which means if we can disrupt those signals, I began pulling out parts. A pulse generator for quantum experiments, signal amplifiers, field projectors. Martinez helped me put everything together into a makeshift device. "What are you building?" Ryan asked, abandoning his useless attempts at communication. "An electromagnetic pulse generator modified to create a specific disruption field," I explained, working quickly. "If the transformed crew are receiving signals through these mathematical anchors, we might be able to temporarily jam the transmission." Phillips joined us, her movements growing stiffer as the patterns spread further up her neck. The quantum resonance frequency would need to match the dimensional interference pattern. I nodded, finishing the connections. "I'm calibrating it to the exact inverse of the crystalline structure's vibration frequency." The pounding at the door suddenly stopped. We froze, looking toward the reinforced window. The faces had disappeared. "Where did they go?" Martinez whispered. His question got answered by a new noise, metal groaning from above. We looked up at the ceiling vent as the grate started to bend, caving inward like something heavy was pushing on it. "They're coming through the ventilation system," Ryan said, backing away. I connected the final wire to our makeshift device. "It's ready. I don't know what range it will have, but..." The ceiling grate tore free, clattering to the floor. Sarah's face appeared in the opening, her features still twisted in that impossible way. Her body followed, twisting into the room all wrong, joints bending backward and limbs stretching way too long. I activated the EM pulse generator. A high-pitched whine filled the lab as blue-white light pulsed outward in concentric rings. Sarah froze mid-descent, her body convulsing. The geometric patterns on her skin flared bright red, then faded to a dull brown. Her face flickered between the twisted version and her normal human features. When she spoke, her voice was her own again, the weird echo gone, replaced by the warm tones I remembered. "Thomas?" she gasped, her eyes suddenly clear and focused. "What's happening to me? Sarah? Are you... I stepped closer, keeping the pulse generator between us. Tears ran down her face as she looked human again for a moment. "It's still in me. I can feel it. But your field is interrupting its signal. Sarah, tell me what it is. What's happening to the crew?" Her body trembled with the effort of maintaining her human form. "It's not evil, Thomas. It's just incomprehensible. We're experiencing first contact with something that exists in dimensions we were never evolved to perceive." "But it's changing people," I argued, "destroying who they are." Sarah shook her head, wincing with pain. "Not destroying, translating. Our brains can't process higher-level stuff the way they are now. It's trying to change us, let us see what's really out there. By force, without consent. It doesn't understand consent, doesn't understand individuality as we do." Sarah's voice grew strained, her features beginning to shift back toward their transformed state. "It exists across all dimensions simultaneously. To it, we're just limited projections of higher dimensional beings. It thinks it's freeing us." The device in my hands began to overheat, the blue light flickering. "The field is failing," Phillips warned, her own voice sounding strange as the patterns on her neck pulsed. Sarah's body jerked, her limbs starting to stretch again. "Listen to me, Thomas. You can't stop this. None of us can. It's already inside all of you. The math, the patterns. They'll complete themselves eventually." "There has to be a way," I insisted. "The ship," Sarah gasped, her voice beginning to layer with harmonics again. "The quantum stabilization system in the auxiliary research bay. It was designed to create stable conditions for quantum experiments. It might... temporarily." Her face twisted back into that creepy shape, and whatever clarity she had was gone. She jumped at me, moving smoothly and quickly again. Martinez hit Sarah in the head with a metal canister she barely noticed, turning to him like a robot. "The main door," Ryan shouted. I turned to see the welded entrance starting to warp, the metal glowing red hot as someone, or something, on the other side pushed with impossible force. The barricade wouldn't last much longer. "We need to get to the auxiliary bay," I shouted, grabbing the overheating pulse generator. "Now!" Phillips pointed to a maintenance hatch in the floor that led to service tunnels between decks. Martinez pried it open while Ryan grabbed emergency lights from a cabinet. Sarah and 2 other changed crew members were now fully in the lab, moving toward us with a weird, stiff way of walking. The main door broke with a screech of tearing metal, showing more changed crew pushing their way in. "Go!" I yelled, activating the pulse generator one last time. The device gave one last stronger pulse before dying completely. The changed crew stumbled, confused for a moment. We took advantage and dropped through the hatch one by one, Martinez pulling it shut above us just as hands grabbed for the opening. The service tunnel was tight and dark, with only Ryan's emergency lights showing the way. We moved fast through the small space, hearing noises in the tunnels around us. "They're in the tunnel system too," Martinez whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "The auxiliary bay is 2 sections over," I said, leading the way. The quantum stabilization system was an experimental addition, designed to create a field where quantum states remain fixed and observable. "If the entity operates on quantum principles across dimensions," Phillips said, her voice growing more mechanical despite her efforts, "a stabilization field might temporarily lock it and us into our traditional 3-dimensional states." We reached a vertical shaft and climbed down the ladder to a lower level. Ryan went first, then Martinez and Phillips. I went last, looking up to see faces staring down at us from the tunnel intersection, faces with too many eyes and mouths that opened in weird ways. The auxiliary research bay was empty when we got there, which was a relief. I quickly went to the main control panel and turned on systems that hadn't been used for months. The quantum stabilization array had been put in for special experiments, but nobody ever fully set it up across the ship. "Help me reroute power," I told Martinez, who immediately began connecting auxiliary power lines. Ryan locked the door while Phillips fixed the emitter. He was moving pretty stiffly now. "Will it work on the whole ship?" Ryan asked. "No," I replied, typing in command sequences. "The field has limited range, but if I can amplify it through the ship's power core, we might cover enough area to temporarily revert everyone." Banging started at the door. Through the small window, I saw Captain Evans's face, or what was left of it, pressed against the glass. His skin looked just like the others now, covered in those weird geometric patterns. "Hurry!" Ryan urged, bracing himself against the door. Martinez connected the final power coupling. "Ready!" I entered the activation sequence, and the system started up with a low buzz. Rings of blue-white light spread from the emitter array, like our makeshift pulse generator, but way stronger. The effect was immediate. Captain Evans jerked around at the window, his face switching between transformed and human forms. Throughout the ship, we heard screams. Not the reality-warping screams from the trench, but human cries of confusion and pain. Phillips collapsed to her knees beside me, her body shaking violently. The patterns on her neck faded from angry red to dull brown, becoming almost invisible. When she looked up, her eyes were clear again. "It's working," she whispered. The field spread out to its maximum range, covering most of the ship. Through the door window, I saw the crew members who had changed now stumbling in the corridor, their bodies partly going back to normal human shapes. Some fell to the floor, passed out. Others leaned against walls, looking at their hands in confusion. I helped Phillips to her feet as the system leveled out, its noise becoming a steady background sound. "How long will it last?" Martinez asked. I checked the power readings. "A few days at most. The system wasn't designed to run continuously." Ryan finally stepped away from the door, loosening up a bit. "What happens when it fails?" I touched the patterns on my arm that were still there but not active while the field was on. "This is temporary," We've stopped the signal from the other dimension, but the changes are stuck in us now. They're part of us. Phillips nodded. We've bought time, nothing more. Time enough to reach Guam? Ryan asked hopefully. Maybe, if we can get the engines running again. I moved to the communications terminal in the corner. And we need to warn them. Prepare them for what's coming. Martinez was already examining the system diagnostics. The engines weren't damaged, just shut down. With the crew temporarily back to normal, we might be able to restart them. I looked around at the three of them, the only crew members not affected. Phillips and I were okay for now because of the quantum field, but we still had the entity's patterns inside us. This was just a temporary fix, not a cure. We should find the captain, I said. See if the stabilization has returned him to himself. We carefully opened the door. The corridor beyond was littered with crew members in various states of consciousness. Some sat against walls, staring at their hands in confusion. Others lay unconscious on the floor, their bodies returned to normal human proportions. Captain Evans was among them, sitting with his back against the wall opposite our door. His face was his own again. The geometric patterns faded to almost invisible lines across his skin. When he looked up at us, recognition flashed in his eyes. "Mitchell," he said, his voice rough but human. "What did you do?" "Activated the quantum stabilization system," I replied, kneeling beside him. "It's temporarily reversed the effects of whatever happened to the crew." "I remember everything," Evans said, horror creeping into his voice. "I was aware the entire time, watching my body move, hearing my voice say things, but I couldn't stop it. Like being a passenger in my own skin." Phillips came over, her medical background kicking in even after what she'd been through. Looks like it brought everyone back to how they were before they fully changed. But our cells are still not normal. Evans got up slowly as I helped him. "How long?" "The system can run for 3 days at current power levels," I answered. "Maybe 4 if we divert non-essential power." The captain nodded, looking up and down the hallway. "Then we have 3 days to reach Guam and figure out what to do next." I kept quiet. We all knew we might be screwed. The entity had changed us at a basic level, down to our quantum structure. The stabilization field just put the process on pause for a while. I helped Captain Evans toward the bridge while other crew members started getting back up around us. We had 3 days of normal life, 3 days to get ready for whatever came next, when our brains might start seeing things humans weren't meant to see, whether we liked it or not. I didn't know what to expect when I accepted the ranger position at Blackwood National Park. The job interview had gone well. My experience hiking these mountains since I was a kid had impressed the hiring committee. They'd nodded along as I talked about my familiarity with the trails, the local wildlife, and how I'd always dreamed of protecting this place. What they hadn't mentioned was Zachary Casey. I'd been on the job less than a week when Zachary cornered me in the equipment shed. I was checking inventory, making sure all the radios were charged for the next day's shift, when his tall frame blocked the doorway. The late afternoon light cast him in silhouette. "Got a minute, Brewer?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel underfoot. "Sure thing," I said, setting down my clipboard. Zachary stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He looked around as if making sure we were alone, which struck me as odd. The shed wasn't exactly a high-traffic area. "Need to tell you something important," he said, leaning against a shelf of emergency supplies. "Something they don't put in the training manuals." I waited, expecting some insider tip about dealing with lost hikers or handling aggressive wildlife. "Never, and I mean never, investigate strange sounds after dark in this park," he said, his blue eyes locked on mine. "Radio it in, mark it on your report, but wait till morning." I tried not to smile. This had to be some kind of initiation ritual, a way to mess with the new guy. "What kind of sounds?" I asked, playing along. "Screams, voices calling for help, crashes that don't make sense." He ticked them off on his weathered fingers. "You hear any of that? You stay put. You understand?" I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Got it." "I'm serious, Clifford," he added, using my first name for emphasis. 28 years I've worked these woods, seen rangers come and go. The ones who listen to me, they stick around. "And the ones who don't?" I asked, still thinking this was some elaborate joke. "They don't," he said simply. Then he turned and walked out, leaving me alone with the equipment and my thoughts. Later that night, I laughed about it with my girlfriend over the phone. "The old-timer tried to scare me with ghost stories today," I told her. "Probably does it to all the new rangers." "Maybe he's trying to keep you safe," she suggested. "From what?" "I've hiked every trail in this park. There's nothing out there I can't handle." I really believed that back then. I'd grown up in these mountains, spent weekends camping with my dad, and later explored on my own. I knew the terrain, could read the weather, and had all the training I needed to handle emergencies. Zachary's warning seemed like superstition from another era, something a man his age might believe after too many years alone in the wilderness. I was wrong. The first time I heard one of the sounds Zachary had warned me about was 3 months into the job. I was doing a night patrol along the eastern boundary, checking for illegal campers. The moon was nearly full, lighting the trail enough that I barely needed my flashlight. Then I heard it. A woman's voice, distant but clear, calling for help. My first instinct was to head toward it. That's what rangers do. We help people in trouble. My hand was already reaching for my flashlight when Zachary's warning popped into my head. I stood there, frozen in indecision. The voice called again, more desperate this time. It seemed to be coming from Miners Ridge, maybe half a mile away. I knew that area well. Old mining paths that tourists sometimes explored despite the warning signs. "This is stupid," I muttered to myself. "Someone could be hurt." But I remembered the look in Zachary's eyes. He hadn't been joking. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Brewer. I'm hearing calls for help near Miners Ridge. Over." "Copy that, Brewer. Any visual?" "Over." "Negative. Too dark to see anything from my position. Request permission to investigate." There was a pause before dispatch responded. "Negative, Brewer. Mark your location and continue your patrol. We'll send a team at first light." Over. I was surprised by the response, but relieved to have the decision taken out of my hands. "Copy that. Marking location now. Over and out." The next morning, I joined the search team. We combed Miners Ridge for hours and found nothing. No lost hikers, no signs of disturbance, not even footprints besides our own. I told myself it must have been the wind playing tricks, or maybe an animal sound I'd misinterpreted. Over the next 2 years, I heard those sounds 5 more times. Twice it was screams. Not animal sounds, but distinctly human. Once it was what sounded like someone calling my name, which sent chills down my spine. Another time it was a massive crash, like a tree falling, except there was no storm and the forest floor showed no evidence of any fallen trees the next day. Each time, I followed protocol. I radioed in, marked my location, and waited until morning to search. And each time, we found nothing. My colleagues never talked about these incidents afterward. They'd file their reports, shrug their shoulders, and move on. I started to wonder if they'd all gotten the same warning from Zachary that I had. The lack of evidence reinforced my original suspicion that Zachary was just being superstitious. Maybe the old ranger had heard similar sounds during his career and created some personal mythology around them. The rational explanation was that sound travels strangely in mountain valleys, especially at night. What sounded like a human scream could easily be a mountain lion. What sounded like my name could be the wind whistling through rock formations. That's what I told myself anyway. But I still never investigated those sounds at night, Call it respect for a veteran ranger or just playing it safe. I'd note the location, wait for daylight, and then search thoroughly. The fact that I never found anything unusual during these searches only strengthened my belief that there was nothing to Zachary's warning. One evening, I ran into him at the station as our shifts crossed over. He was hanging up his hat, about to head home, when he noticed me gearing up for night patrol. "Eastern boundary tonight?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, checking the campgrounds and making sure no one's wandered off trail." He studied my face for a moment. "You've heard them by now, haven't you? The sounds?" I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, a few times." And nothing," I said with a shrug. "I follow protocol. Wait till morning. We never find anything." A small smile formed on his face. "Good. You're smarter than you look." I laughed. "Or maybe there's just nothing out there, Zachary." His smile faded. "Keep believing that if it helps you sleep. Just don't break protocol." I wanted to press him further, to ask what he thought was really out there, but he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. "Stay safe tonight, Brewer," he called over his shoulder. "Always do," I replied. As I drove to my starting point that night, I thought about Zachary and his warning. Part of me still believed he was just being superstitious. Another part wondered if there was something more to it, something the veteran ranger had experienced that he couldn't or wouldn't explain. Either way, I felt confident in my abilities. I knew these mountains, knew this forest. If there was anything dangerous out there, I was trained to handle it. And if the mysterious sounds were just tricks of nature, well, no harm in being cautious. I parked my truck at the trailhead and checked my equipment one last time before heading into the darkening forest. The sun had just set, painting the sky in fading oranges and purples. Soon it would be fully dark, with only my flashlight and the stars above to guide me. As I stepped onto the trail, I felt that familiar mix of respect and comfort that these woods always gave me. This was my place, had been since childhood. Whatever strange sounds might echo through the night, I was at home here. But I still kept my radio closed just in case. The scream cut through the humid August night, high-pitched and unmistakably human. I froze mid-step on the trail, my flashlight beam wobbling as I listened for it to come again. 3 years into my ranger position at Blackwood, I knew every inch of this northern section. But tonight, something felt different about these familiar woods. There it was again. A woman's voice, crying out from the direction of Willow Creek, maybe half a mile northeast of my position. I checked my watch, 1:17 in the morning. The full weight of Zachary's warning pressed against my thoughts. Don't investigate strange sounds after dark. Radio it in. Mark it on your report. Wait until morning. But this didn't sound like the other screams I'd heard over the years. Those had been strange, almost theatrical. Like something trying to sound human but not quite getting it right. This had a raw, panicked edge that made my skin prickle. I unclipped my radio, thumb hovering over the call button. Protocol was clear. I'd followed it for 3 years without question. "Hello? Is anyone there?" The voice called again, weaker this time. My hand dropped from the radio. What if someone was actually hurt out there? What if they needed immediate help? I couldn't live with myself if I left someone to suffer all night when I was this close. This is different, I muttered to myself, trying to justify breaking the rule that had been drilled into me since day one. This isn't one of those sounds. This is real. I tightened my grip on my flashlight and started moving toward Willow Creek, pushing through the dense undergrowth where the trail ended. The humid air clung to my skin as I hiked, making my uniform stick uncomfortably to my back. My boots sank slightly into the soft ground with each step. The forest seemed to close in around me as I moved deeper into it. Normally teeming with night sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional owl, the woods had gone strangely quiet. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease as I pushed forward, Focusing instead on the creek, I could now hear gurgling ahead. "Hello?" I called out, sweeping my flashlight across the tree line. "Forest Service. Is anyone there?" No response came. I pressed on until I reached the bank of Willow Creek. The water flowed faster than usual, swollen from the summer rains we'd had earlier in the week. My light caught something by the water's edge. A figure huddled on a flat rock beside the creek. I approached cautiously, keeping my flashlight trained on the form that slowly resolved into a young woman. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, clothes torn and caked with mud. "Miss, are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice steady and professional despite the relief washing over me. This was a real person, not some unexplained phenomenon. I'd made the right call. She looked up at me, her face pale in the harsh beam of my flashlight. I lowered it slightly to avoid blinding her. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought no one would find me." I crouched down a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. "I'm Ranger Brewer with the Forest Service. Are you injured?" She shook her head. "Just scared and lost. My name's Tammy. Tammy Fitzgerald." "What happened, Tammy?" I asked, looking her over for any signs of injury she might not be reporting. "I was hiking with friends," she said, pushing wet strands of brown hair from her face. "We were trying to reach the lookout point before sunset, but I slipped at the creek crossing. The current was stronger than it looked. It pulled me downstream, away from my group." She gestured vaguely upstream. "I've been trying to find my way back, but it got dark so fast." I nodded, though something about her story didn't sit right with me. The creek was running high, but not enough to sweep away an adult, and the lookout point was on the southern trail system, miles from here. No hiking group should have been anywhere near this section of the park. "How many people were in your group?" I asked. "4, including me." She hugged her knees tighter. "Do you think they're looking for me?" "I'm sure they are," I said automatically, though I hadn't received any reports of missing hikers. "When exactly did you get separated?" "This afternoon," she said after a slight pause. "Around 4, I think." That made even less sense. If she'd been missing since 4 in the afternoon, her friends would have reported it by now. We would have had search teams out before dark. I noticed she was shivering despite the warm night. The temperature couldn't have dropped below 75 degrees, yet she trembled as if caught in a winter storm. "Are you cold?" I asked. "Yes," she said simply, her teeth almost chattering. The water was so cold. But it wasn't. Willow Creek ran warm this time of year, especially after days of summer heat. "Let me help you up," I said, extending my hand. "I'll take you back to the ranger station. We can call search and rescue to find your friends and get you some dry clothes." She looked at my outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. Her fingers felt like ice against my skin, and I nearly pulled back from the unexpected chill. "Thank you," she said as I helped her to her feet. She was unsteady, leaning against me more than I expected. "Can you walk okay?" I asked. She nodded. "Just tired." I guided her away from the creek and back toward the trail, my flashlight cutting a path through the darkness. The strange silence of the forest persisted, with none of the usual night sounds returning. No frogs, no insects, nothing but our footsteps and breathing. "The station isn't far," I told her, though my mind was racing with questions. Why was she so cold on a warm night? How had she ended up in this remote section of the park? Why hadn't her friends reported her missing? But I kept these thoughts to myself as we walked, deciding that getting her to safety took priority over satisfying my curiosity. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about Tammy Fitzgerald and her story wasn't adding up. I led Tammy along the trail toward the ranger station. The path was familiar, a route I'd walked hundreds of times during my 2 years at Blackwood. The packed dirt should have taken us straight to the station in about half an hour, Plenty of time to get her somewhere warm and figure out what was really going on with her story. "The station has dry clothes and a first aid kit," I said, glancing back to make sure she was keeping up. "We can call search and rescue from there to look for your friends." Tammy nodded but said nothing. She walked a few steps behind me, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm night. The beam of my flashlight swept across the path ahead, catching the occasional reflection of animal eyes watching from the underbrush. I frowned, suddenly aware of something odd. Those reflective eyes had vanished. In fact, all the normal forest sounds had disappeared. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves from small creatures moving through the underbrush, no distant owl calls. Just silence. Our footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the quiet. Each snap of a twig under our boots echoed like a gunshot. "Do you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Tammy's voice was flat. "Nothing. That's what's weird. The forest is too quiet." She didn't respond. I turned back to look at her, the flashlight beam catching her pale face. Her expression remained blank, almost disinterested. "So, you said you were hiking with friends?" I asked, trying to get her talking. "What are their names? We'll need to report them missing." "Just some people from school." "Which school is that?" She paused for several seconds. "Western State." I knew Western State was over 100 miles away. "That's a long drive to come hiking. You must have left pretty early this morning." "We stayed at a hotel last night." "Which one?" Another long pause. "The one by the highway." Her answers were getting vaguer, not more specific. I tried a different approach. "You mentioned trying to reach the lookout point. Which one were you heading for? Eagle Peak or Miners Ridge?" "The one with the view," she said. I stopped asking questions for a while and focused on the trail. We'd been walking for about 20 minutes now. The junction to the ranger station should be coming up any second, a wooden sign marking the split in the trail. I shined my flashlight ahead, expecting to see it. But the path just continued straight into the trees. That couldn't be right. I'd walked this route so many times I could practically do it blindfolded. The junction was unmistakable, a large wooden sign with carved arrows pointing to Ranger Station and East Trail. I kept walking, thinking maybe I'd misjudged the distance. After another 5 minutes, there was still no sign of the junction. "We need to stop for a minute," I said, coming to a halt. Tammy stopped too, still hugging herself, watching me with those dark eyes. I pulled out my GPS unit from my belt. It was standard issue park equipment, reliable and accurate. I turned it on and waited for it to connect to the satellites. When the screen lit up, I stared at it in disbelief. Instead of showing our position on the trail network, it displayed our location as a blank area. No trails, no landmarks, nothing. Just empty terrain. "This doesn't make any sense," I muttered. I'd hiked these woods for over 15 years, first as a kid with my dad and then professionally as a ranger. I knew every trail, creek, and ridge in Blackwood. Yet according to the GPS, we were in unmapped territory. I looked around, trying to orient myself using the stars, but the tree canopy was too thick to see the night sky clearly. "Is something wrong?" Tammy asked, her voice still oddly calm. "We should have reached the junction by now, and my GPS isn't showing any trails." I tried not to let my growing unease show in my voice. "Let me call for some help." I unclipped my radio from my belt. "This is Ranger Brewer calling station. Over." Static crackled from the speaker. I tried again. "This is Brewer calling the station. Anyone copy? Over." More static, then a voice broke through. "Brewer? This is Trevor. What's up? Over." Relief washed over me at hearing Trevor's voice. Trevor Graves was one of the more experienced rangers, and we'd worked together on numerous occasions. "Trevor, I've got a lost hiker with me. We're trying to make it back to the station, but I think we're off trail. GPS isn't showing any mapped trails where we are. Over. Where did you find the hiker? Over. near Willow Creek in the northern section. We've been walking south for about 25 minutes. Should have hit the main junction by now. Over. There was a pause before Trevor responded. That's weird. You should definitely have reached it. Stay put. I'll drive out to meet you. Can you fire a flare so I can get your position? Over. Negative on the flare. Don't want to risk a fire in these conditions. But if you head to the northern trailhead and follow the main path, we should be somewhere along it. Over. Copy that. I'm heading out now. Keep your radio on. Over. Thanks, Trevor. A sudden scream cut through the radio. Trevor's voice filled with raw terror. It was so loud and unexpected that I nearly dropped the radio. Then, abrupt silence. Trevor? Trevor, do you copy? Over. I waited, heart pounding in my chest. No response. Trevor, this is Brewer. Do you copy? Over. I spoke more urgently now, nothing but static. Trevor, come in. Are you there? Over. The radio remained silent except for the soft hiss of static. I tried switching channels, thinking maybe he'd changed frequencies for some reason, but got the same result on every channel. What was that? Tammy asked, still sounding remarkably calm despite the blood-curdling scream we'd just heard. I don't know, I said, trying the radio again. Trevor, this is Brewer. Please respond. Over. The silence from the radio felt heavy and ominous. Trevor had screamed. There was no mistaking that sound. And then nothing. Something had happened to him, something bad enough to make an experienced ranger cry out in terror. I clipped the radio back to my belt, keeping the volume up so I'd hear if Trevor called back. The forest around us remained unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. We need to keep moving, I said, more to myself than to Tammy. We need to find the trail junction. I looked at her, standing there in her torn clothes, seemingly unbothered by Trevor's scream or our increasingly strange situation. Her calmness was starting to feel less reassuring and more disturbing. Let's go, I said, turning back to the trail and raising my flashlight. Stay close behind me. I started to notice something wasn't right. We'd been walking for at least 40 minutes on what should have been a straight path back to the ranger station, but the trees around us looked oddly familiar. Wait, I said, stopping abruptly and raising my flashlight. The beam caught the distinctive shape of a fallen log with a mushroom cluster growing from its center. We've passed this before. Tammy stopped a few paces behind me, her arms still wrapped around herself despite the warm night air. She didn't respond, just watched me with those unnervingly calm eyes. This log. We walked past it about 15 minutes ago. I moved my flashlight to illuminate a rock formation just beyond the log. 3 boulders stacked against each other like a natural sculpture. And those rocks, too. I turned to look at Tammy, expecting her to share my confusion or concern. Her face remained blank, almost expectant. Don't you think that's weird? We should have reached the junction by now, but we're going in circles somehow. She shrugged slightly. Maybe we took a wrong turn. There haven't been any turns. We've been on a straight path. I pulled out my GPS unit again, which still showed nothing but blank terrain. This doesn't make sense. I looked up at the canopy above us. The trees blocked any view of stars that might help with navigation. My training kicked in. When lost, stay put and wait for rescue. But Trevor had screamed over the radio, and no one else knew where we were. Let's keep going, I said, more to myself than to Tammy. We continued walking, my flashlight leading the way. The beam seemed weaker now, the darkness around us thicker somehow, as if it were physically pressing in against the light. I tapped the flashlight against my palm a few times, but the beam continued to dim. 10 minutes later, I spotted the same fallen log and rock formation again. This isn't possible, I muttered, stopping in my tracks. I looked back at Tammy. We're walking in circles. She said nothing, just watched me with that same eerie calmness. She hadn't mentioned our repetitive surroundings once. Don't you see it? I asked, gesturing at the log. This is the third time we've passed this exact spot. Maybe we should try a different direction, she suggested, her voice flat. I nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Yeah, let's try going this way. I pointed to what looked like a gap in the trees to our right, away from the path we'd been following. We pushed through the underbrush, branches catching on my uniform. The forest seemed to grow denser the further we went, the spaces between trees narrowing. My flashlight beam had weakened to a sickly yellow glow that barely illuminated a few feet ahead. This isn't right, I said after what felt like hours of walking. My watch showed we'd been moving for almost 3 hours since I'd found Tammy by the creek. None of this is right. The batteries in my flashlight were new. They shouldn't be dying this quickly. I hit it against my palm again, harder this time, and the beam flickered before stabilizing slightly. As I raised the light, something caught my eye through a gap in the trees ahead. A structure. A building. There's something up ahead, I said, quickening my pace. As we got closer, I could make out more details. Green paint. A wooden sign. The familiar shape of a ranger station. Identical to the one where I worked on the other side of the park. I stopped, staring at it. This isn't possible. The station stood in a small clearing looking exactly like my workplace, down to the arrangement of windows and the slight tilt of the wooden sign. But there was no ranger station in this part of Blackwood. I knew the park maps by heart after 2 years of service. This building shouldn't exist. Yet there it stood, solid and real in the beam of my failing flashlight. Wait here, I told Tammy as we approached the building. I'm going to check it out. She nodded and stopped at the edge of the clearing while I moved toward the structure. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I climbed onto the porch. The windows were dark, no light visible inside. I tried the door handle, expecting it to be locked, but it turned easily in my hand. The door swung open with a long, low creak. I swept my flashlight across the interior and froze. Dark stains covered the floor and walls. Large splashes and smears of what looked horribly like dried blood. Papers were scattered across the floor around an overturned desk. Chairs lay on their sides, and a filing cabinet had been pulled over, its contents spilled across the room. I stepped inside carefully, the floorboards groaning beneath me. The air smelled stale and metallic. "Hello?" I called out, though I felt certain the place was empty. My voice echoed strangely in the silent room. I moved toward the desk, my boots crunching on broken glass and scattered papers. With the toe of my boot, I flipped over some of the papers. Incident reports, duty rosters, weather logs, official park documents, just like the ones at my station. Something caught my eye among the debris, a rectangular piece of paper face down on the floor. I knelt and picked it up, turning it over. It was a photograph showing a female ranger standing in front of Blackwood's main entrance sign. She wore the same uniform I did, her brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, a professional smile on her face. She looked to be in her late 20s, with bright eyes that seemed to stare directly at me. I turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written a message in shaky handwriting. "The forest takes what it wants. Amelia Dennis never left. Neither will you." Below the message was a date from 7 years ago. I stared at the writing, a cold weight settling in my stomach. 7 years ago. Before my time at Blackwood. I'd never heard the name Amelia Dennis before. Yet here was evidence she had been a ranger just like me. I looked back at the dark stains on the floor and walls, the overturned furniture, the signs of struggle or violence that had occurred in this impossible ranger station. The forest takes what it wants. My hands shook as I held the photograph, the weak beam of my flashlight barely illuminating the woman's face. I needed to show this to someone. I needed to understand what was happening. I turned and hurried back toward the door, the photograph clutched tightly in my hand. I rushed outside, the photograph clutched tight in my hand, ready to show Tammy what I'd found. "Tammy?" I called out, stepping off the porch of the impossible ranger station. The clearing where I'd left her stood empty. I moved to the exact spot where she'd been standing just minutes ago, sweeping my flashlight across the ground and surrounding trees. "Tammy!" I called again, louder this time. My voice bounced back at me, the echo sounding wrong, too hollow, lasting too long. The forest swallowed my words and sent them back distorted. I waited for a response, but only that unnatural silence pressed in around me. I crouched down, running my hand over the earth where she should have left footprints. The soil was soft enough that her boots would have made impressions, but the ground remained unmarked. Even my own tracks seemed to fade a few yards back, as if the forest floor was erasing our presence. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, standing up and turning in a slow circle. I kept the failing flashlight beam moving, searching for any sign of her. A scrap of clothing caught on a branch, trampled vegetation, anything. But there was nothing to suggest Tammy Fitzgerald had ever been there with me. Nothing to prove she'd ever existed at all. I checked my watch. Barely 15 minutes had passed since I'd entered the ranger station. She couldn't have gone far, not in her condition, not in this terrain. "Tammy!" I shouted one more time, cupping my hands around my mouth. The echo came back wrong again, almost like someone mocking my call rather than a true reflection of sound. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I expanded my search, moving in widening circles around the clearing, careful not to lose sight of the station. The photograph felt heavy in my pocket, its message burning in my mind. The forest takes what it wants. Had it taken Tammy, too? After 10 minutes of searching, I found nothing. No broken twigs, no disturbed undergrowth, no sign anyone besides me had been here. It was as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. I pulled out my radio, trying different channels, but got only static. The GPS unit still showed blank terrain. I was considering my next move when I heard it. Crashing sounds coming from the east, something large moving through the underbrush without any attempt at stealth. I swung my flashlight toward the noise, hand moving to the pepper spray on my belt. The crashing grew louder, branches snapping, leaves rustling. "Who's there?" I called out, taking a step back. The underbrush parted and a figure stumbled into the clearing. The weak beam of my flashlight revealed a Park Service uniform, torn and dirty. Blood gleamed wetly on exposed skin. "Trevor?" I said, recognizing my colleague despite his condition. Trevor Graves lurched forward, his movements uncoordinated. Deep scratches marked his face and arms, still bleeding freely. His uniform hung in tatters as if he'd been dragged through thorns. But most disturbing were his eyes, unfocused, dilated, looking through me rather than at me. "Trevor, what happened to you?" I asked, moving toward him. He closed the distance between us with surprising speed, grabbing my shoulders with both hands. His grip was painfully tight, fingers digging in like claws. "It's a desolate place, Clifford," he said, his voice hoarse. "The forest leads you where it wants you to go. It's a desolate place." His eyes rolled wildly, never quite focusing on me. Blood from a cut on his forehead trickled down his temple. "Trevor, you need to calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're hurt. We need to get you out of here." "It's a desolate place," he repeated, shaking me slightly. "The forest leads you where it wants you to go. It's a desolate place." I gently but firmly removed his hands from my shoulders. "I know, Trevor. I understand. But we need to move now, okay? We need to get back to the trail." He nodded vaguely, still repeating the same phrases. I put my arm around his shoulders, noting how he flinched at the contact and began guiding him away from the ranger station. I cast one last look at the building, wondering if I should go back for anything else, but decided Trevor's condition was more urgent. "We're going to walk this way," I told him, pointing with my flashlight. "Just stay with me." Trevor stumbled alongside me, occasionally mumbling his mantra. It's a desolate place. The forest leads you where it wants you to go. I checked the GPS again, hoping for some miracle, but the screen still showed unmapped territory. With no stars visible through the thick canopy and no landmarks I recognized, I had to make a decision. "Trevor, I'm going to fire a flare," I told him, though I wasn't sure he understood. "The fire risk is worth it now. We need to find our way out." I took a flare from my belt, aimed it through a gap in the trees, and fired. The red light arced up, briefly illuminating the forest in a crimson glow before disappearing above the canopy. I waited, watching for any sign it had been seen. Nothing changed, but the action gave me a moment to think. If we were truly lost in some impossible space, maybe conventional navigation wouldn't work. But if this was still Blackwood, still the real world, then there had to be a way out. "We're going to keep moving," I told Trevor. "Just stay close." I chose a direction that felt right, pure instinct, and started walking, keeping Trevor beside me. His condition worried me. The bleeding hadn't stopped, and his delirious state suggested shock or worse. We walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes according to my watch. Trevor's strength was failing, his steps becoming more unsteady. I fired another flare, and this time, through the trees ahead, I caught a glimpse of something familiar. The silhouette of Lookout Ridge, a landmark I knew well. "We're getting closer," I told Trevor, who nodded vacantly. With renewed determination, I guided us toward the ridge. Gradually, the forest began to feel right again. The trees thinned out. The path beneath our feet became more defined, and when I checked the GPS, faint outlines of mapped trails appeared on the screen. "We're almost there, Trevor," I said. "Just a little further." He didn't respond, focused only on putting one foot in front of the other. The scratches on his face and arms looked angry in the beam of my flashlight, which was growing dimmer by the minute. Finally, we emerged onto a trail I recognized, the main northern loop. Relief flooded through me as I checked the GPS again and saw our position clearly marked on the map. We'd somehow found our way back to mapped territory. Trevor collapsed to his knees, his strength finally giving out. I knelt beside him, checking his pulse, rapid but present. His skin felt cold and clammy, classic signs of shock. I pulled out my radio and tried again. This time, instead of static, I heard the blessed sound of the dispatcher's voice. "This is Ranger Brewer," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and professional despite everything. "I've got Ranger Graves with me on the Northern Loop Trail, approximately 2 miles from the trailhead. He's injured and in shock. We need immediate medical assistance." "Copy that, Ranger Brewer," came the reply. "Emergency services are being dispatched. Can you provide details on his injuries?" "Multiple lacerations to face and arms, possible concussion, definite shock," I reported. "He's conscious, but disoriented." "Understood. Paramedics are en route. Estimated arrival 20 minutes. Can you confirm your exact location?" I gave them the GPS coordinates, then set about making Trevor as comfortable as possible. I removed my jacket and placed it over him, elevating his feet using my backpack. "Help is coming," I told him, squeezing his shoulder gently. "Just hang on." Trevor's eyes found mine for a brief moment of clarity. "It's a desolate place, Clifford," he whispered. "The forest leads you where it wants you to go." Then his eyes unfocused again, and he went back to staring at nothing. I sat beside him, one hand on his wrist monitoring his pulse, the other clutching the photograph from the ranger station. I wondered what Trevor had seen out there in the dark, what had left those marks on him, and whether it was the same thing that had taken Tammy. I stayed with him like that until I heard the approaching sirens and saw the flashlights of the paramedics coming up the trail. As they took over Trevor's care, loading him onto a stretcher and starting an IV, I stood back and watched, exhaustion finally catching up with me. "You coming with us, Ranger?" one of the paramedics asked as they prepared to carry Trevor down to the waiting ambulance. I nodded, too tired to speak, and followed them down the trail. Behind us, the forest stood silent and dark, keeping its secrets for another night. I tracked Trevor's condition obsessively after the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. The emergency room staff at Regional Medical Center worked quickly, cleaning and stitching the deep lacerations that crisscrossed his arms and face. I sat in the waiting room for hours, the photograph from the ranger station burning a hole in my pocket while I replayed the night's events in my mind. Family only, the nurse at the desk kept telling me when I asked for updates. He doesn't have family in the area, I explained for the third time. I'm his colleague. We work together at Blackwood. She softened slightly at that. He's stable. The doctor will be out shortly. When the doctor finally appeared, his assessment was clinical and detached. Ranger Graves is suffering from severe lacerations, exposure, and shock. We're keeping him for observation and further testing. When can I see him? I asked. Tomorrow. He needs rest. Trevor ended up staying at Regional for a full week. His physical wounds required multiple treatments. The cuts were deeper than they initially appeared, with several needing additional stitches after the first round of suturing didn't hold. The psychological damage seemed even more severe. The nurses told me he woke screaming during the first few nights, thrashing so violently they had to restrain him. When I was finally allowed to visit, I found Trevor propped up in the hospital bed, staring out the window. The scratches on his face had formed angry red lines that stood out against his dark skin. "Hey," I said, pulling up a chair beside him. Trevor turned slowly, his eyes taking a moment to focus on me. "Clifford, how are you feeling?" Like I got dragged through hell. His voice was raspy, as if he'd been screaming for hours. "They say I'm lucky." I leaned forward. "Trevor, what happened out there? What did you see after we lost radio contact?" He frowned, his forehead creasing with effort. "I remember answering your call. You said you found a lost hiker. I was heading out to meet you, and then..." He shook his head. "Nothing. Just waking up here." "You don't remember screaming on the radio? Or what attacked you?" "Attacked me?" Trevor looked down at his bandaged arms as if seeing them for the first time. "The doctor said I must have fallen somewhere. Hit my head." I pulled my chair closer. "Trevor, something happened to you out there. You were saying things when I found you, about the forest leading people where it wants them to go." His eyes widened momentarily, then clouded with confusion. "I don't remember any of that. The doctor later told me this was common with traumatic events. The mind protects itself," he explained during one of my visits. "Between the possible concussion and exposure, memory loss isn't unexpected." But I knew better. Something had happened to Trevor in those woods, something that had left him physically and mentally scarred. The same something that had created an impossible ranger station and made a woman named Tammy Fitzgerald vanish without a trace. The incident consumed my thoughts in the weeks that followed. I couldn't focus on my regular duties. Every patrol, every routine task became background noise to my growing obsession with uncovering the truth. I kept the photograph of Amelia Dennis in my locker, taking it out whenever I was alone to study her face and the ominous message scrawled on the back. I started with the park's employee records, searching for any mention of Amelia. The digital archives went back 10 years, but her name appeared in only a handful of documents. Basic employment records showing she'd worked at Blackwood for 3 years before her death, and a brief mention in a staff newsletter welcoming new rangers. The park's memorial wall provided another clue, a small brass plaque listing her name and dates of service, along with a simple epitaph, "Lost to the wilderness she loved." No details about how she died. I expanded my search to local newspapers, spending my days off at the county library scrolling through microfiche archives. Finally, I found what I was looking for, a small article dated 7 years ago about a tragic accident at Blackwood National Park. According to the official report, Amelia Dennis had been hiking alone on her day off when she fell from a cliff face on the northern boundary. Her body was recovered 2 days later by a search team. The article quoted then Assistant Chief Ranger Mickey Estrada, calling it a devastating loss to the Blackwood family. But as I dug deeper, troubling inconsistencies emerged. The accident report mentioned Amelia hiking in an area that was closed for maintenance that month. Weather records showed heavy rainfall the day she supposedly went hiking, making a recreational climb unlikely for an experienced ranger. Most disturbing was what I found in the back issues of the staff newsletter. 3 weeks before her death, Amelia had received a commendation for diligence in documenting unexplained phenomena in the northern section, the same area where I'd found Tammy. I brought my findings to Zachary first, catching him alone in the equipment shed where he'd warned me years earlier. "I need to ask you about Amelia Dennis," I said without preamble. Zachary froze, then slowly put down the radio he'd been checking. "Where did you hear that name?" I showed him the photograph. His face went pale. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "In a ranger station that shouldn't exist, the night Trevor got hurt." Zachary handed the photograph back like it might burn him. "You need to let this go, Clifford, for your own good." "What happened to her, Zach? What's out there in the northern section?" He shook his head. "Talk to Mickey if you want to know more. But my advice, drop it." Chief Ranger Mickey Estrada was less subtle. When I requested permission to organize a search for the mysterious ranger station, he denied it immediately. "We don't have resources for wild goose chases," he said from behind his immaculate desk. "Especially not based on hallucinations experienced during a high-stress rescue." "It wasn't a hallucination," I insisted. "And what about Amelia Dennis? She was documenting something in that same area before she died." Mickey's face hardened. Ranger Dennis died in a tragic accident while hiking off duty. End of story. The accident report doesn't add up. She was supposedly in a closed area during bad weather. That's enough. Mickey stood up, his stocky frame imposing despite his average height. "You're overstepping, Brewer. Whatever you think you found out there, it wasn't real. Trevor got lost and injured himself. You found him and brought him back. That's all that happened." But I couldn't let it go. I filed formal requests to access Amelia's complete personnel file and the full investigation into her death. I asked to review the search and rescue logs from the night Trevor was injured. Each request was denied or returned with heavily redacted documents. I began asking other rangers about Amelia, but most of the current staff hadn't worked at Blackwood when she died. Those who had changed the subject or claimed not to remember much about her. 2 weeks after Trevor returned to light duty, I cornered Mickey again after a staff meeting. "I need to talk to you about what happened that night," I said as the other rangers filed out. Mickey's gray eyes were cold behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "We've been through this." "No, we haven't. Something happened to Trevor out there. Something happened to Amelia Dennis in the same area, and the administration is covering it up." "Careful, Brewer." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You're making accusations without evidence." "I have evidence." I pulled out copies of the weather reports, the maintenance schedules, and the newsletter mentioning Amelia's commendation. She was investigating something in the northern section before she died, the same place where I found a woman who vanished without a trace, and where Trevor was attacked by something he can't, or won't, remember. Mickey looked at my documents without touching them. "You know what I see? I see a ranger who's becoming obsessed with conspiracy theories. A ranger who might need psychological counseling before he can continue field duties." The threat was clear. "Are you saying I'm imagining things?" I asked. "I'm saying that stress affects people differently. Trevor experienced physical trauma and exposure. You experience the stress of a night rescue gone wrong. It's natural to try to make sense of chaotic events." His tone was patronizing, as if explaining something to a child. "But pursuing these theories, isn't healthy for you or helpful to the park. So I should just forget what I saw, pretend it never happened? Mickey straightened his already perfect uniform. I'm advising you, as your superior officer, to focus on your assigned duties and leave the past in the past. If you can't do that, I'll have to note concerns about your fitness for duty in your next evaluation. He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the meeting room with my useless evidence and unanswered questions. That night, I returned to my small ranger cabin and spread everything I'd gathered across my kitchen table. The newspaper articles, the redacted reports, the photograph of Amelia Dennis. The message on the back seemed to mock me. The forest takes what it wants. It had taken Amelia. It had tried to take Trevor. And whatever was happening at Blackwood, the administration was determined to keep it buried. I got the transfer orders on a Tuesday, a thin envelope with the Cedar Ridge State Park logo waiting in my mailbox, the kind of thing administration leaves when they don't want to face you directly. 3 months had passed since finding Tammy by the creek, since Trevor's screams over the radio, since the impossible ranger station with its blood-stained floors, and the photograph that now lived in my desk drawer. I read the letter twice, standing in the small kitchenette of my ranger cabin. Budget constraints. Staffing needs. Effective 2 weeks from today. The language was bureaucratic and final. The signature at the bottom belonging to Mickey Estrada, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to me since our confrontation about Amelia Dennis. The phone rang 3 times before Mickey picked up. Ranger Station, Estrada speaking. It's Brewer. I just got transfer papers to Cedar Ridge. A pause, then Mickey's voice, carefully neutral. Yes, that's correct. I didn't request a transfer. Nobody said you did. This is an administrative decision based on departmental needs. I leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. This is about my investigation, isn't it? There is no investigation, Brewer. There never was. You experienced a stressful night rescue. Your colleague was injured in an accident, and you've been fixating on conspiracy theories ever since. If anything, this transfer is a fresh start. I'd take it as a favor. A favor would be telling me the truth about what happened to Amelia Dennis. The line went quiet for so long, I thought he'd hung up. Pack your things, Brewer. Your last day is the 26th. Cedar Ridge is expecting you the following Monday. The line went dead. I spent the next 2 weeks doing my regular patrols, avoiding the northern section where I'd found Tammy. The other rangers treated me like I had something contagious. Even Zachary stayed clear, though I caught him watching me sometimes with an expression that looked almost like pity. On my last day, I arrived at the station early. The administration building was empty, computer terminals dark except for the soft glow of screensavers. I sat at the records terminal and logged in, navigating to the incident reports from that night. Nothing. I checked the date range again, expanding it to the entire week. There should have been my initial report about finding a lost hiker, the medical response for Trevor, the search parameters. But the system showed no incidents on that date. I tried the medical logs next. Trevor had been out for a week recovering. There should be paperwork, duty reassignments, medical leave documentation. Nothing. My hands felt cold as I searched for any mention of my radio calls that night. According to the system, I hadn't made any transmissions during my entire shift. The call log was blank for my radio ID. I sat back in the chair, the reality sinking in. They hadn't just blocked my investigation, they'd erased it. As far as Blackwood's records were concerned, nothing had happened that night. I glanced at the clock, 20 minutes before the morning shift arrived. Working quickly, I searched for Dennis Amelia in the personnel archives. The search returned only basic employment records, hire date, position, end of service. I copied everything to a flash drive, then searched the digital archives of staff newsletters. There were only 2 mentions of her, A welcome announcement and the brief commendation I'd already found about documenting unexplained phenomena. I copied those too, then pulled up the park's mapping system. The northern section where I'd found Tammy showed normal trails and terrain features. Nothing unusual. I took screenshots anyway, marking the approximate location where I'd encountered her and where the impossible ranger station had appeared. Footsteps in the hallway made me quickly close the programs and pocket the flash drive. I logged out just as the door opened and Mickey walked in, stopping when he saw me. "Brewer, you're in early." "Just clearing out my locker," I said, standing up. He watched me for a moment, eyes dropping to the computer I'd just used. "Everything squared away for your departure?" "Almost. Just need to turn in my radio and keys." "Good. Cedar Ridge is a nice park. Smaller than Blackwood, but the trails are well maintained. You'll do fine there." I nodded, moving toward the door. "One question before I go." Mickey's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened slightly. "What happens to rangers who investigate the sounds at night? The ones who don't follow Zachary's warning?" His face remained carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Amelia Dennis was documenting something in the northern section. The same place where Tammy appeared. The same place where Trevor got attacked by something that left him repeating that the forest leads people where it wants them to go." Mickey stepped closer, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "Listen carefully. You had a difficult experience during a night rescue. Trevor had an accident. Everything else is stress and an overactive imagination. Take this transfer as the gift it is, Brewer. Some rangers never get the chance to leave." The threat wasn't subtle. I held his gaze for a moment, then walked past him toward the locker room. An hour later, I stood beside my truck in the staff parking lot, the last box of belongings secured in the back. The photograph of Amelia Dennis was wrapped in a shirt at the bottom of my duffel bag, along with the flash drive of copied files. I'd taken one last walk around the station, turning in my keys and radio to a clerk who barely looked at me. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, looking at Blackwood's ranger station in the rearview mirror. The questions still burned in my mind. What had happened to Tammy? What had attacked Trevor? What had Amelia Dennis discovered in the northern section that had gotten her killed? And why was the administration so determined to cover it all up? The answers weren't here. Not anymore. But I had names, dates, and files. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from Blackwood National Park, the photograph and my memories the only evidence that anything had happened at all. I settled into my new position at Cedar Ridge, but the memories from Blackwood clung to me like a persistent shadow. The routine was different here. Smaller park, fewer visitors, more maintenance duties. Yet I found myself scanning the tree line during night patrols, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The rational part of my brain knew I was safe now, hundreds of miles from whatever haunted the northern section of Blackwood, but that didn't stop my hand from drifting to my radio at every unexpected noise. My new colleagues seemed nice enough. They invited me to weekly poker games and asked normal questions about my transfer. I gave them the sanitized version, budget cuts, staffing needs, and they accepted it without pressing further. Cedar Ridge didn't have the same atmosphere of secrets and unspoken rules that permeated Blackwood. No one pulled me aside to warn me about investigating strange sounds. No areas of the park were subtly off limits. But during quiet moments in my cabin, I spread my collected evidence across the kitchen table and stared at the photograph of Amelia Dennis. Her eyes looked back at me from beneath the regulation cap, bright and determined. The message scrawled on the back: "The forest takes what it wants. Amelia Dennis never left. Neither will you." Seemed less threatening now that I had physically left Blackwood, but no less disturbing. I often found myself questioning if Tammy Fitzgerald had ever existed at all. Had I imagined her sitting by Willow Creek that night? Her vague answers about her friends? Her unnaturally cold skin despite the warm night, the way she vanished without leaving a single footprint. It all seemed more like a hallucination than reality. But if I had imagined her, what about Trevor? His injuries were real enough. The impossible ranger station with its blood-stained walls had felt solid beneath my feet. The flash drive with my copied files became my most valued possession. I reviewed its contents almost nightly, searching for patterns or clues I might have overlooked. The employment records were frustratingly sparse. Just basic information about Emilia's hire date and position. The newsletter mentions were equally unhelpful, though the commendation about documenting unexplained phenomena in the northern section continued to nag at me. What had she been documenting? And why had all records of her work disappeared? 3 weeks into my new position, I started researching other strange disappearances in national parks across the country. The internet was full of conspiracy theories and unsubstantiated claims, but beneath the noise, I found disturbing similarities to my own experience. People vanishing without a trace in areas they knew well. Search parties finding no evidence despite extensive efforts. Witnesses describing unusual silence in the forest just before disappearances. Rangers and park employees who refused to discuss certain incidents or areas. I created a spreadsheet tracking the cases that seemed most credible, noting locations, dates, weather conditions, and witness accounts. The pattern wasn't immediately obvious, but it was there. A higher concentration of unexplained disappearances in older parks with large wilderness sections, particularly those with a history of indigenous warnings about certain areas. Blackwood fit that profile perfectly. I tried contacting Trevor twice. The first time he didn't pick up. The second time he answered but hung up as soon as I identified myself. I couldn't blame him. Whatever had happened to him in the forest that night had left both physical and psychological scars. Maybe forgetting was his way of coping. My 4th week at Cedar Ridge, I was assigned to night patrol along the eastern boundary. The moon was nearly full, just like the night I'd heard Tammy calling for help. The similarity made me uneasy, but I reminded myself that Cedar Ridge was different. Nothing unusual had happened here, at least not according to any records I could find. I was checking a campsite that had been reported abandoned when I heard it, a scream echoing through the trees. Not an animal sound, not the wind. A human scream, high and terrified, coming from somewhere to the north. My first instinct was to run toward it, just as I had at Blackwood, but something stopped me. The memory of Trevor's voice cutting out over the radio, the blood-stained walls of the impossible ranger station, Zachary's warning about rangers who investigated night sounds and never came back. I unclipped my radio and called dispatch. "This is Ranger Brewer on the eastern boundary. I just heard what sounds like a human scream approximately half a mile north of my position, requesting backup before investigation." The dispatcher responded immediately. "Copy that, Brewer. Stay at your current location. Rangers Peterson and Alvarez are 20 minutes out. Do not approach alone. Repeat, do not approach alone." Understood. Holding position and awaiting backup. I clipped the radio back to my belt, then unholstered my flashlight and swept the beam across the trees. Nothing moved in the darkness. The scream came again, more desperate this time. Every instinct told me to help, to run toward the sound. But I remembered Tammy's ice-cold skin, Trevor's bloodied face, the photograph with its ominous warning. I stayed put, counting the minutes until headlights appeared on the access road. Rangers Peterson and Alvarez pulled up in a park vehicle, both looking alert but not particularly concerned. This was probably routine for them, investigating strange sounds that usually turned out to be mountain lions or drunk campers. "Heard it twice," I told them as they approached. "Female voice. Sounds like she's in trouble. Coming from that direction." I pointed north. Peterson nodded. "Let's check it out. Stay together. Standard formation." We moved through the forest as a unit, calling out periodically to identify ourselves as park rangers. No response came except the normal sounds of the night forest, insects, small animals moving through undergrowth, the occasional distant owl call. The forest here wasn't unnaturally silent like Blackwood had been that night. After 45 minutes of methodical searching, we found nothing. No lost hikers, no signs of disturbance, no footprints other than our own. Peterson called it in, and we were ordered back to our regular patrols. Probably a mountain lion? Alvarez suggested as we walked back. They can sound eerily human sometimes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I knew what I'd heard, and it wasn't a mountain lion. But I also knew better than to push the issue. When morning came, I joined a more extensive search team that combed the area thoroughly. 8 rangers spread out in a grid pattern, checking every ravine and thicket. We found nothing unusual, no abandoned equipment, no signs of struggle, no evidence anyone had been in distress. As we regrouped at the vehicles, Chief Ranger Wilson clapped me on the shoulder. "Good call radioing it in, Brewer. Always better to check and find nothing than ignore something and miss someone who needs help." I nodded, thinking of Zachary's warning back at Blackwood. For the first time, I truly understood the wisdom in it. Not because there was nothing to investigate. I was more convinced than ever that something strange was happening in our national parks, but because whatever it wasn't something a lone ranger with a flashlight should face. I had survived whatever lurked in Blackwood's depths, but the experience had changed me. I carried the knowledge now, heavy as stone. Some mysteries were better left unsolved, at least not alone. The forest took what it wanted, but it hadn't taken me. Not yet. That night, I added Cedar Ridge to my spreadsheet of incidents, noting the date, location, and lack of physical evidence. Then I opened my drawer and looked once more at Amelia Dennis's photograph before carefully returning it to its hiding place. I wouldn't forget her, or Tammy, or what happened at Blackwood. But I would be smarter now about how I searched for answers.